Chapter 484. Wang Qianzong looked down at the medal in his hand. Their positions were the same in the general direction. Wang Qianzong couldn't attack Li Tianlan blatantly. Li Tianlan also didn't dare to do anything to Wang Qianzong. To some extent, the confrontation between the two hovered at the bottom line of the crime of treason. Between advancing and retreating, it was either the sea in the sky or the cliff. Their positions invisibly smoothed out the huge gap between Wang Qianzong and Li Tianlan's strength. So in everyone's eyes, when the two really began to fight, it was also the time to show their trump cards one by one. The instrument he threw to Li Tianlan was his trump card. And the medal Li Tianlan threw to him was also Li Tianlan's trump card. The medal was extremely delicate and small, pure black, but there was a faint white line running through the whole black in the middle. Wang Qianzong looked at the medal and was silent for a long time. He knew that Li Tianlan would not see the instrument in his hand. But he had seen Li Tianlan's medal. This was the medal that Li Tianlan wore on his chest in the final battle of Heaven Capital. This medal symbolized an identity that could not be ignored in Zhongzhou State. Young governor of Sai City. Wang Qianzong frowned and glanced at Li Tianlan. In the almost frozen atmosphere, he suddenly said, "Not enough. How do you know if you don't try?" Li Tianlan stood where he was and looked at Wang Qianzong with unyielding eyes. The roaring explosion outside crossed a distance of several kilometers, as if it were close to his ears. Wang Qianzong thought silently for a while. He really miscalculated tonight, but he didn't lose in strategy. No one could have imagined that Li Tianlan's injury would recover so quickly. In other words, from the moment Li Tianlan opened his eyes, it meant that Wang Qianzong lost. Because Qin Qinghuan could not give up the power of the Snowdance Corps. Wang Qianzong could not give up the Snowdance Corps either. So when he was invited by Qin Qinghuan to preside over the overall situation, many forces in the dark of Reki City took advantage of his absence to target the Shadow Throne. Li Tianlan made a trap with his own injury, and now he used the general trend to imprison him here. As for the result, Wang Qianzong was unwilling to think about it. If Li Tianlan had not been absolutely sure, he would never have acted so decisively tonight. So after tonight, the Shadow Throne might be destined to suffer heavy losses. And this might have been the result that Li Tianlan met King Tong for the first time on the day he was in a coma. Wang Qianzong looked around again. He was surrounded by all the experts that the Snowdance Corps could bring out. Outside the office of the president, the Snowdance Corps had begun to gather. The glaring white searchlights kept spinning in the air, and the sound of helicopters rang out in the night sky. All the weapons of the Snowdance Corps were ready for battle. As long as Li Tianlan gave the order, the entire office of the president would be razed to the ground in the shortest time. Such a battle array could not trap Wang Qianzong. If it were other countries, Wang Qianzong could break out of the encirclement by himself with his sword. In his current realm he would not even be injured. But at this time he was surrounded by the army of Zhongzhou State. And the foreign troops he wanted to kill the most were besieging the Shadow Throne. So Wang Qianzong could move, but he could not. He couldn't kill them, so he couldn't get out. This round was truly perfect, almost flawless. Wang Qianzong glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood there quietly, calm and peaceful. But vaguely Wang Qianzong saw something different in him. It was the flow of time. The sound was the track of growth, and it was the taste that gradually became dark. Wang Qianzong saw a lot of things which seemed to be familiar. He had seen this kind of taste on Li Guangta back then and even on himself. Everyone who stood at the peak of the dark world had this kind of taste. It was the indifference and prudence, gloominess and coldness, awe-inspiring and majesty that had been honed in countless saber lights and sword shadows. This was the so-called fierce and ambitious person. For the first time, Wang Qianzong admitted from the bottom of his heart that Li Tianlan was terrible. The most important thing was that his growth rate in all aspects was so amazing, as if he was born to belong to the dark world. Wang Qianzong suddenly appreciated Li Tianlan. He appreciated him sincerely. This kind of appreciation was very sincere, and because of this sincerity, the killing intent behind this kind of appreciation seemed more naked. "You want to kill me?" Li Tianlan looked at Wang Qianzong and asked calmly. "Do you really want to stop me?" Wang Qianzong asked. This sentence, combined with Li Tianlan's previous question, carried an extremely naked sense of threat. Everyone's heart sank. At this time, it is the army of Wulan State that is fighting outside. Prime Minister Rieker discussed it with me before. They have confirmed that some terrorists are hiding in the Caesar Hotel, so they went to encircle and suppress them. As friends of Wulan State, we can't interfere in the internal affairs of Wulan State. Li Tianlan said calmly, "So I want to ask Your Majesty to stay in the office of the President for a few more days." Wang Qinzong couldn't help laughing. Li Tianlan's serious nonsense completely infuriated him. With his smile, the space around Wang Qinzong became distorted at a speed visible to the naked eye. The space was constantly twisted and broken, and a bit of thick darkness with sword intent continued to gather in front of him. Lights, night, wind and rain. Everything was completely absorbed by that bit of thick darkness. In the darkness that could not be seen, Li Tianlan stood there. His eyes were hazy as if they were filled with mist. A faint white mist surged on him. The mist was very weak, but it became the only light in the absolute darkness. Everyone began to gather in the direction of the mist. There was more and more mist, and it spread farther and farther. Wang Qinzong suddenly frowned. Everyone was completely wrapped in his dark sword intent. And he himself was also wrapped in the white mist. His vision was a blur. Everyone else's sight was full of darkness. The only thing they had in common was that neither of them could see anything. Li Tianlan's voice sounded through the mist, slow and clear. Please think twice, Your Majesty. Now the general trend of Zhongzhou state is in my hands. If Your Majesty draws your sword, have you really thought about the general trend of the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Qinzong did not respond. But the thick dark sword intent around him began to slowly retreat. The vast white mist also began to disappear. Lights, wind and rain, explosions, and the office of the president reappeared in everyone's perception. Wang Qinzong was still standing there. He looked at Li Tianlan and was silent for a long time. Dragon vein? He suddenly asked. Vaguely, he seemed to understand what Li Tianlan meant by saying that the general trend of Zhongzhou state was in his hands. Li Tianlan carried the dragon vein. He was equivalent to carrying the destiny of the entire Zhongzhou state. If he was strong, Zhongzhou state was strong. If Zhongzhou state was strong, he was strong. With a huge amount of fate blessing him, Li Tianlan in this state was completely unique in all aspects. You actually know how to use the dragon vein? Wang Qinzong asked again. Li Tianlan was silent. No one knew what the dragon vein was. Even if he carried the dragon vein, he did not know what it was. But it was certainly not a weapon. If it was not a weapon, how could it be used? Even Li Tianlan was puzzled by the appearance of the white mist. He could not give Wang Qinzong any explanation at all. Li Tianlan took a step forward, looked at Wang Qinzong and said, Your Majesty, please. He did not ask him to go out. Instead he asked him to go in. Wang Qinzong restrained his sword intent, which completely proved that he had completely recovered his calmness. It also showed that Wang Qinzong had completely accepted the failure tonight. Even if the failure this time could be said to be extremely heavy. Tonight, Li Tianlan had taken enough advantage, so he did not care about his attitude. At this time, when talking to Wang Qinzong, he suddenly became very respectful. Wang Qinzong looked at him with a smile and suddenly said, Do you think you will win tonight? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. As I said, your trump card is not enough. Wang Qinzong said calmly. He threw the medal representing the identity of the young governor of Sai City to Li Tianlan again. Li Tianlan's face changed. He reached out his hand and silently put the medal on his chest. After a moment of silence, he said blandly, If it's not enough, I'll play another card. Wang Qinzong looked at Li Tianlan and seemed to be observing the truth of his words. Li Tianlan's expression was flat, making it impossible to see through his emotions. Wang Qinzong sighed softly. At least in terms of hiding his emotions, Li Tianlan did not lose to some old foxes in the dark world. Where is my room? Wang Qinzong said calmly. When he said this, he seemed to feel his heart twitch. Thinking of the situation after tonight, a trace of killing intent flashed through his eyes again. Your Majesty, if you don't mind, you can live next to me. Li Tianlan said slowly, as if he was not aware of Wang Qinzong's killing intent. He took the lead to turn around and lead the way. Wang Qinzong stood there for a while. The sword intent around him disappeared completely. The wind and rain all over the sky fell on him, and his body was soon completely soaked. The summer rain in Eastern Europe was cold. In the cold rain, Wang Qinzong seemed to have figured something out. His body completely relaxed and he followed Li Tianlan calmly. The experts of the Snowdance Corps stayed in place and looked at each other for a while. Cool breeze and drifting cloud coughed and left the office of the president first. Imprisoning Wang Qinzong was the most important step in tonight's plan. But it was not the whole plan. Everything about the Snowdance Corps was the real key. When the experts of the Snowdance Corps left the office of the president, Li Tianlan, with a calm expression, also arranged a room for Wang Qinzong. The army of the Snowdance Corps was still gathering and paying close attention to every move of the office of the president. After confirming that Wang Qinzong could not leave, Li Tianlan took Dongqing Rushi back to his residence. Dongqing Rushi gently closed the door. Li Tianlan sat in the chair, poured himself a full cup of herbal tea and drank it in one gulp. Dongqing Rushi clearly saw that Li Tianlan's face, which had been ruddy just now, suddenly became a little pale. As he drank the tea, his forehead was already covered with cold sweat. "I want to take a shower and change my clothes." Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said with a bitter smile. Only he knew that at this moment, the cold sweat on his back had completely soaked his military uniform. "What's wrong?" Dongqing Rushi came over and reached out to touch Li Tianlan's forehead. Li Tianlan reached out to hold her hand and shook his head. "It's okay. I'm just scared." Apex. Chapter 485. For anyone, death was something uncontrollable and irresistible. Li Tianlan was not afraid of being in a desperate situation. But he was really afraid of death. Death was not just endless darkness for him. He was sure that if he died, the people living around him would probably live a life worse than death. That was what scared him from the bottom of his heart. Facing Jiang Chenyin, Jiang Chensong, Black Ghost and King Tong, Li Tianlan could be fearless. Being in a desperate situation did not mean that there was no room for struggle. Being able to struggle meant that there was infinite hope. When his dual wind and thunder veins were still intact, his final sword move could also give him the confidence to turn the tables on most occasions. But facing Wang Tianzong was different. The confrontation in the office of the president did not last long, but once Wang Tianzong's killing intent rose, it meant death for Li Tianlan. He was powerless to resist. In Wang Tianzong's current realm, he did not even need to use all his strength to make Li Tianlan disappear in an instant. Li Tianlan was sure of that. Even if he was intact, even if his dual wind and thunder veins were not damaged, even if he had the final sword move with the eternal silence of mountains and rivers as the starting move, he still could not withstand Wang Tianzong's killing intent. Li Tianlan could now see the end of martial arts. This was a very rare occurrence. But at the same time it was a very sad thing. Because he could see his position clearly in Wang Tianzong, who was infinitely close to the end, he knew very well how far he was from Wang Tianzong. For Li Tianlan the distance was very long. If he wanted to get closer, maybe only time was needed. But for Wang Tianzong the distance was very short. He only needed one sword move to make the distance between him and Li Tianlan disappear, and even Li Tianlan himself disappear. So for a long time, although Li Tianlan did not dislike Wang Tianzong, he did not like him either. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State left more than just a great reputation in the dark world. At least for Li Tianlan, every time Wang Tianzong appeared in his sight, it meant that his life was under Wang Tianzong's control. That was a really bad feeling. Li Tianlan subconsciously lifted the teapot beside him. The teapot was very light. Dongqing Rushi silently poured him a cup of purified water. Li Tianlan took it and drank it in one gulp. The cold sweat on his body increased, but as the cool pure water entered his stomach, he became relaxed. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette, lost in thought. On the night of the great change in Wulan State, he borrowed deity sword energy with his sword intent and had a chance to seriously injure Wang Tianzong. So he thought that Wang Tianzong should thank him for his reason. Now he was also grateful for Wang Tianzong's rationality. Li Tianlan took a big drag on his cigarette and remained silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong was bold. No one dared to doubt this. If the Sword Emperor didn't have the courage to kill, wouldn't he be a joke? Therefore there were too many choices in the short confrontation just now. He was the Marshal of Zhongzhou State and the commander of the Snowdance Corps. Wang Tianzong did not dare to kill him. But that didn't mean he didn't dare to kill him. At least in the current situation, if Wang Tianzong really killed him with a sword just now, he might be able to bear the consequences in a short time. Li Tianlan knew his own value, but only the living were valuable. If he died in Eastern Europe, all the expectations placed on him would be in vain. The academics would abandon the Li family as soon as possible. Sai City's position was unclear. The Dongqing clan might do something, but the entire giant group would not fight desperately with the Wang family of Beihai. As for the reason? Because he was already dead. In a short time, Zhongzhou State needed Wang Tianzong. Even with his strength, the Wang family of Beihai would still be as stable as Mount Tai. However, killing the Marshal of Zhongzhou State was a felony after all. Such a crime was enough to plant a thorn in the heart of the whole Zhongzhou State. This thorn might not have any consequences when Wang Tianzong was alive, but when he was old or died, today's cause would become tomorrow's effect. A family that dared to openly kill its marshal, no matter how deep-rooted it was bound to be eliminated. Therefore Wang Tianzong was very rational, and he had a long-term vision. Now the confrontation was over and he imprisoned Wang Qianzong. At this moment, everything seemed to be reasonable. But for Li Tianlan, the scene just now really made him feel like he was wandering between the gate of hell and the gate of hell. Dongqing Rushi picked a new set of clothes for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took the brand new military uniform but did not move it. "Shall I go and fill it?" Dongqing Rushi said obediently. Li Tianlan nodded and then shook his head. He was still in shock. Finally, he said with a bitter smile, "Do you think I'm as timid as a mouse and afraid of death?" "No." Dongqing Rushi found a wet towel and gently wiped Li Tianlan's face. "I'm very happy that you're afraid of death. Everyone is afraid of death. It's not a shameful thing. Only when you're alive can you better protect the Dongqing clan in the future. My father once told me that when a person is in a high position he can choose his bottom line, principles, good and evil, but he can't give up his life." Dongqing Rushi's voice was soft. She quietly stared at Li Tianlan's face and said softly, "You were afraid in the afternoon, right? When you heard about Carlos you were afraid." "Yes." Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said, "From this afternoon I thought that if I died here, the people around me might end up more miserable than Carlos. This is what I have to carry on the way up. On this road, the measure of going to heaven or going to hell is not good or evil but victory or defeat." Li Tianlan paused and repeated again, "It's victory or defeat. You'll win." Dongqing Rushi squatted in front of Li Tianlan and looked up at him. Her face was incomparably beautiful. Li Tianlan subconsciously reached out his hand and touched her face, but his eyes looked in the direction of the next door. Next door. It was Wang Qianzong's residence. In the following time, if there was no accident, Li Tianlan would keep him imprisoned here until the chaos in Eastern Europe was over. But in the chaos, the most likely thing to happen was an accident. Li Tianlan frowned. In a sense, he did something that had never been done in the Dark World tonight. He successfully imprisoned the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. This kind of humiliation was enough to turn into invincible anger. Li Tianlan didn't know how much Wang Qianzong hated himself now. But he knew very well how afraid he was of Wang Qianzong. This might be the only opponent in this life that made him fear from the bottom of his soul. Opponent? Li Tianlan looked down at the military uniform on him. In this military uniform he was Wang Qianzong's opponent. Without this military uniform what was he? He stood up and stretched his body casually. The fiery sword intent instantly evaporated all the sweat on his body. Li Tianlan smiled. His face was still pale, but there was a touch of indescribable meaning in his smile. "I suddenly find that I hate Wang Qianzong a little." Dongqing Rushi stood up and pulled Li Tianlan's hand without saying anything. Li Tianlan's eyes turned out of the window. His gaze seemed to cross the square in front of the office of the president, the nearby blocks, and fell in front of the Caesar Hotel not far away. The roaring explosion shook the whole city. The bloody and chilling atmosphere came faintly. Li Tianlan looked into the distance and whispered, "Things in Eastern Europe should end soon." The chaos in Eastern Europe was his first battle on the stage of the Dark World. The timing was perfect. What was even more perfect was that he seized the opportunity and also improved his status. But all of this now, none of it was his own, including the Snowdance Corps. After the chaos in Eastern Europe ended and he returned to China to report on his work, the future of the Snowdance Corps had always been a very sensitive issue in Zhongzhou State. So everything he had now was illusory except for his own force. And he wanted it to be real. His country was in Tianan, which was extremely real. That was what he was most likely to have in his own hands. Even if it was in the frontier, as long as it belonged to him, every inch of land looked extremely beautiful and magnificent. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Rushi and suddenly said, "After returning to China, I'll take you to the south, okay? I'll go wherever you go." Dongqing Rushi replied seriously. Li Tianlan smiled gently. "My sister and I will help you," Dongqing Rushi whispered. Dongqing Rushi whispered. She suddenly remembered that she had also called Wang Yuetong's sister, and Wang Yuetong seemed to be in an awkward position now. But Dongqing Rushi naturally would not take the initiative to mention this problem, so she calmly corrected her. "It's Sister Little Bai." Li Tianlan murmured softly, and his tone was like a sigh. The chaos in Eastern Europe was becoming more and more obvious. He felt more and more the limitations of this era on him. So he had vaguely understood Qin Weibai's ultimate purpose. Today's era might be in chaos because of her, and it would also die because of her. But in the end, who would it be because of? "She's also a silly woman," Li Tianlan whispered. Dongqing Rushi wrinkled her nose and didn't speak. When we settle down in Tianan, I'll keep you at home, plant flowers, walk dogs, go shopping, and do whatever you want. With his lack of imagination and understanding of today's upper class, the life of the so-called rich wife that he could think of was probably carefree shopping, planting flowers, and walking dogs. Dongqing Rushi shook her head and whispered, "It's so vulgar. But I just like it." Li Tianlan laughed. In the constant roar of the huge explosion, his laughter seemed to be particularly warm. Dongqing Rushi moved a little closer. Li Tianlan naturally held her in his arms. The door next door rang. Wang Tianzong, who was destined to be sleepless tonight, walked out and looked in the direction of the explosion. He couldn't see anything, but he stood there for a long time. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed, and he suddenly thought of the instrument that Wang Tianzong had thrown to him before. Do you know what instrument Wang Tianzong was holding in his hand at that time? Li Tianlan lowered his head and asked. They were very close. Li Tianlan moved closer and almost touched Dongqing Rushi's ear. Dongqing Rushi's little face was flushed, and she was as beautiful as a flower. She muttered to herself, "That devil is so ugly." Devil? Devil? Li Tianlan suddenly thought of something. He took out his mobile phone. The phone was quiet. He still hadn't received a call from Prime Minister Rieger. Li Tianlan dialed a number. The moment he waited for the phone to be connected, he thought of the extremely mysterious devil troop of the Wang family of Beihai, which only appeared in legends. And this legend seemed to be about to become a reality tonight. Li Tianlan also thought of Jiang Shangyu, who made tea with the rain on the Huangpu River boat in Huading that day. That seemed to be the first time he had heard the exact news about the devil troop. Not a legend. So he dialed Jiang Shangyu's phone at this time. Chapter 486. In any era, even the real chosen one could not occupy the light that could illuminate the whole dark world alone. For Li Tianlan, from a student to a marshal, it was a step to the sky after a good preparation. The final maneuver of the two academies of Zhongzhou State helped Li Tianlan. But this was the dullest and highest quality maneuver in recent years, and the loser also had his own light. With the grudge between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai, facing an opponent who was already ahead of him, Wang Xingxiao, who dared to take the initiative to lower his realm, was undoubtedly the most dazzling young man besides Li Tianlan. After the final maneuver, Wang Xingxiao directly fell from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the fire-flaming realm. Under the circumstance that his realm fell by 1,000 miles, the whole Zhongzhou state paid more attention to the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. Judging from Wang Xingxiao's current performance, everyone agreed that his current strength had surpassed that of the young Wang Tianzong. In terms of potential, Wang Xingxiao, who had the wind and thunder veins, was even better than his father. As for his courage, his retreat from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the peak of the fire-flaming realm was enough to explain everything. Hard work. Wang Xingxiao reached such a realm at the age of 25. If he didn't work hard, even if he had 10 wind and thunder veins, he wouldn't be able to get to where he was now. So in many people's hearts, even if Li Tianlan could sweep the dark world and become the chosen one of the present age in the next few decades, Wang Xingxiao's final achievement might not be much worse than Li Tianlan's. Now even many people agreed that Wang Xingxiao's final achievement would surpass his father. This was not blind speculation. It followed the development law of the Wang family of Beihai. Throughout the dark world, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be the most dazzling position. This was a great family that had always been in the top position for hundreds of years. How tough the shoulders needed to bear such a glorious glory. Everyone had something to carry. Mount Dibing and Beihai province were the weight that always pressed on the shoulders of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Such a huge weight would make every heir of the Wang family of Beihai crazily become stronger. The more glorious they were, the more afraid they were. Therefore, for hundreds of years, the patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai were not necessarily wise masters of great talent and strategy, but they were definitely experts at the peak, without exception. Now, with the passage of time, Wang Tianzong, who already knew his destiny, would soon enter his 60s. The Sword Emperor was approaching the end of his peak state. Behind him was the Wang family of Beihai. Outside Beihai, the Li family had quietly staged a comeback. Li Tianlan, who was 22 years old, advanced triumphantly. He was so talented that he could be called unparalleled in the world. Under such circumstances, what Wang Xingxiao felt was definitely enough to suffocate him. Under such great pressure, it was not surprising that Wang Xingxiao would eventually reach any height. Now everyone recognized Li Tianlan's strength and potential. Most people believed that Zhongzhou State and the Dark World would belong to Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao in the future. In addition to the two of them, the young master of Kunlun City, Gu Han, who had the Heavenly King's new body, was also dazzling. But after the final maneuver, the brilliance of the young Heavenly Son on him was constantly fading, while the other person became more and more important in everyone's eyes, shining like a rising star. It was not Lin Yuxian, the almost unknown young master of the Lin clan. It was a name that used to stand at a high place, but was always a little short of the young Heavenly Son. Jiang Shangyu. Everyone knew that Jiang Shangyu was very strong. But no one knew why he was strong. In the past few years, he had been silently walking behind several young Heavenly Sons. His combat capability was a little short, and his progress was a little short. He rarely had any outstanding achievements. Until the battle of the final maneuver. A Jiang Shangyu who had already determined his future path. A Jiang Shangyu who would steadily enter the invincible realm in the future. A brilliant feat. Such a path and such a style of doing things were too familiar. Perhaps no one said anything explicitly, but such a Jiang Shangyu did hit the hearts of every high-level official of Zhongzhou State hard. Because many years ago there was also a young man like Jiang Shangyu today. He was silent, gentle, low-key and did not compete. He silently walked behind several top geniuses. His combat capability was slightly poor, and his progress was slightly poor. But his footsteps were extremely stable, so stable that he had never stopped until today. Several top geniuses of his generation had left the peak of the era for various reasons, but he was still walking forward step by step. He staggered but with a power that made the world awe. His name was Wang Tianzong, the current sword emperor of Zhongzhou State. Wang Xingxiao was Wang Tianzong's son. But Jiang Shangyu's path was so similar to Wang Tianzong's. His performance in the final maneuver completely suppressed Gu Han. At least in the hearts of many people now, Jiang Shangyu's future was more valued and worth looking forward to than Gu Hanshan's. Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu. The three most popular young people in Zhongzhou State now, as the maneuver of the two academies of Zhongzhou State came to an end, they finally chose two completely different paths. The chaos in Eastern Europe broke out. Li Tianlan led the army north and caused great changes in Wulan State. On the date of death, he killed two invincible realm experts in a day and captured Wulan State, which Zhongzhou State had been thinking about all the time for 20 years. Li Tianlan's name resounded throughout the dark world, like the sun at high noon. But Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu were completely silent. There was no news of Wang Xingxiao at all. It was said that Jiang Shangyu had been recuperating in Beijing, but no one had seen him except his biological father, Jiang Shan. But on the night of August 17th in Eastern Europe, in the morning light of August 18th in Zhongzhou State, Jiang Shangyu's figure did appear in a small manor of the Jiang family in Jiang City. The sun was shining brightly in Jiang City. The warm sunlight shone on Jiang Shangyu's body, and his whole body seemed to be plated with a layer of gold. Jiang Shangyu held his mobile phone and looked at the flowers in the manor. The flowers were in full bloom and the night had just passed. In the early morning, the petals of each flower were full of vitality with hazy moisture. Jiang Shangyu, whose face was still a little pale, looked at the flowers in front of him with joy and gladness in his eyes. Jiang Shan, the head of Beijing province, came over from behind. He looked at his son, who was reaching out to play with the flowers, and asked, "Who called?" Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu turned around and said. Jiang Shan raised his eyebrows and seemed a little surprised. Jiang Shangyu thought of his call with Li Tianlan just now and shook his head with a smile. The call between the two of them did not last long. Li Tianlan simply asked about the devil troop. Jiang Shangyu said that what he knew was limited, and he had already said what he should say. Naturally he could not give any clues now. Li Tianlan did not say much and simply hung up the phone. No pleasantries, no probing, and straight to the point. It seemed that the life-and-death fight in the final maneuver not long ago had become a grudge that gradually faded away and eventually disappeared without a trace. Jiang Shangyu thought quietly and suddenly said, "Reki City may be very lively tonight. Do you have news?" Jiang Shan asked. Jiang Shangyu shook his head. "It's Li Tianlan. He asked me about the devil troop." The devil troop had always been a legend in the outside world. The so-called legend was something that did not necessarily exist. If he had not really seen or encountered something, Li Tianlan would not have called him to ask about the devil troop in detail. Because they were not familiar with each other. And Li Tianlan did not like to listen to stories. Jiang Shan's eyes narrowed, and a touch of fear flashed through his eyes. The Jiang family could confirm the existence of the devil troop. The invincible realm expert of the Jiang family had died in the hands of the devil troop. Otherwise, the current Jiang clan would be even more powerful and frightening. Jiang Shan thought silently for a while and then asked, "How are your injuries?" "Not bad." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "I took a step forward to deal with the final maneuver. As for taking 2 steps back, it's a small matter. To be honest, in the final maneuver I was going to imitate Wang Xingxiao. If I could retreat from the thunder-shocking realm to the fire-flaming realm that day, my foundation might become more terrible now." "How is that possible?" Jiang Shan shook his head. Jiang Shangyu was 4 years older than Li Tianlan and 1 year older than Wang Xingxiao. He was already 26 years old this year. His martial arts realm progress was not fast, but at the age of 22 he had already stepped into the peak of the fire-flaming realm. From the peak of the fire-flaming realm to the thunder-shocking realm, Jiang Shangyu had polished this small realm for 4 years. This was what it meant to be well prepared. His foundation in the fire-flaming realm was unimaginably solid. Even if he really wanted to drop his realm, it was impossible for him to return to the fire-flaming realm. In the final maneuver he also chose to drop his realm. But compared with Wang Xingxiao, he could only barely take a step back, which was considered a solid foundation. You know, nothing is impossible in martial arts. It's just that we haven't found the right way or we don't have enough luck. Jiang Shangyu put away his mobile phone and quietly stared at the not-so-dazzling sunshine on the horizon. In the bright light he stood there and his outline was extremely deep. In fact, you don't have to pursue perfection. Jiang Shan looked at Jiang Shangyu, the son who had made him so satisfied that he could not be more satisfied. He knew his character and his ability, but he also knew his ambition. It was ridiculous to have ambition without ability. It was sad to have ability but ambition. He had ability and ambition, but he didn't have enough resources. What was this? Jiang Shan had mixed feelings. He reached out and patted his son on the shoulder, saying in a heavy voice, "You are very good now, really good." Jiang Shangyu reached out and held Jiang Shan's hand. He chuckled softly and warmly. "Dad, what I want is not very good. I've seen through the word good a long time ago. It's meaningless. The higher you go, the less people think they are good. What I'm pursuing is not very good. What I'm pursuing is just not worse than others." He paused and continued with a smile, "Not worse than anyone else. Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan. Why can't I do what they can? What? They can go up step by step with resources. Our Jiang family doesn't have so many resources. But when they only look at the road ahead, I can bend down and even kneel down. I will dig out the resources I need little by little. In this way I may go slower, but I won't miss anything. I will reach the end one day. I'm not worse than anyone else, and the Jiang family will not be worse than any other family. You are my son." Jiang Shan said in a low voice, "Of course you're not worse than anyone else. It's me. I'm not capable as a father. If enough." Jiang Shangyu smiled and patted his father's hand on his shoulder. He said softly, "It's really enough. Dad, do you know who I admire the most in my life?" Jiang Shan didn't speak, but a few names that could turn the world upside down in the dark world flashed through his mind. They were all real strong people. "I admire you the most." Jiang Shangyu said softly, "Your realm is not invincible and your position in the decision-making committee is ordinary. But you are my father. Our Jiang family doesn't have so many resources, but our Jiang family has been moving up and getting stronger and stronger. You bow your head, bend your waist, and be careful. You are a high-level official, but you live a humble life. But everyone in the Jiang family has never felt inferior, and I don't either. Dad, to be honest, you don't have to give me too many things because you've given me a lot. I've been very stable since I was a child. Stability is the best. Maybe with your status you can't give me more things, but that's not what I need. You've done enough. The Jiang family and I can have today all depend on you. So I don't envy the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong who is invincible, the god of war Gu Xingyun who is domineering, and the Li family Li Honghe who is selfless. In my heart, only my father is the greatest and the most worthy of my worship." Jiang Shan felt the temperature of his son's palm and closed his eyes slightly. The sun illuminated his slightly white temples, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes trembled slightly. "Dad, next, leave the Jiang family to me. Our Jiang family is a process from nothing to something. We can have nothing, but the men of the Jiang family have a clear conscience about the family and their children in this life. I'll do what you can't do. Even if I can't do it, I'll have a son. I hope I'll become the person my son admires the most, take over what I can't do and continue to do." Jiang Shangyu held his father's palm tightly and whispered, "Everything will be fine. Stability is the best." Jiang Shan whispered. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a moment and then smiled. How can stability be achieved without reaching the peak? The peak was supreme. Only when one was supreme could there be real peace and quiet. Tranquility was stability. Jiang Shan took a deep breath, opened his eyes, looked at Jiang Shangyu in front of him and said gently, "Don't be too anxious." "I understand." Jiang Shangyu nodded with a smile. His eyes were in a trance. He took back his palm, put it behind him and said with a smile, "I just want to grasp what I can grasp." The sun gradually became dazzling. The blazing light covered all the brilliance in his eyes. Jiang Shangyu suddenly called out softly, "Dad." Jiang Shan responded. "Have you heard of heart cancer?" Jiang Shangyu asked. Jiang Shan froze for a moment. "Heart cancer. It's an extremely rare kind of heart tumor. There have been few cases in Zhongzhou state in the past 100 years. Occasionally there are a few, but they are all caused by special reasons. It's a disease that can't happen without special circumstances," Jiang Shangyu said. Jiang Shan shook his head. "I haven't seen it." "I haven't seen it either." Jiang Shangyu smiled. "I just remembered a story I heard a long time ago. It is said that in a certain country, a powerful big shot found that his position was getting more and more embarrassing after the country's situation changed, and his influence was getting weaker and weaker. In order to save the fate of himself and his family, he had to pray to another rising young magnate. Unfortunately, this old big shot had offended the young magnate a long time ago, but in order to reverse the fate of himself and his family, he still decided to apologize to the young magnate humbly. The two met at a high-standard banquet. The old man had a cold and coughed a few times. Out of concern, the young magnate called a doctor to diagnose the old man. The medicine of Zhongzhou state is broad and profound. The doctor only felt the old man's pulse and had already diagnosed that the old man had heart cancer and needed immediate treatment. The old man knew that he didn't have heart cancer, but he still thanked the young magnate for his kindness and apologized to him seriously. The other party was very generous and said that the previous grievances were just a misunderstanding. After the banquet, everything in the past would be written off. However, he made a request to the old man, or rather, a request. Jiang Shangyu's tone suddenly paused. He tightly pursed his lips, and his eyes were as calm as a pool of stagnant water. "And then? What request did he make?" Jiang Shan asked. "And then?" Jiang Shangyu laughed. The young magnate said that heart cancer was rare in the world, and it was simply a fantasy to have a tumor in the heart. He hoped that he could see what the so-called heart cancer looked like with his own eyes, and hoped that the old man could fulfill his wish. The corner of Jiang Shan's mouth moved. "Dad." Jiang Shangyu laughed in a strange tone. "Do you know what happened in the end?" The corner of Jiang Shan's mouth moved and he couldn't say anything for a while. The old man agreed to the other party's request at that banquet. He called home, then asked the young magnate for a dagger, stabbed him, and directly dug out his heart. Jiang Shan suddenly felt that this midsummer morning was so cold, like the deep winter. Jiang Shan had never heard of this story. It didn't matter whether this story was true or false. What mattered was that the content of this story was so cruel. There were high and low people in life and they would all die in the end. But in the eyes of the superior, life and death could also be controlled and played with. The only difference was whether the other party wanted you to die or not. When the other party wanted you to die, he could directly kill you if he had a reason. When the other party wanted you to die, he could directly order you to die if he had a reason. When the other party wanted you to die, he could directly force you to die if he had no reason or power. In the eyes of the superior, if he wanted you to live, a cold was a cold. If he wanted you to die, a cold was heart cancer. Extreme. Cold-blooded. Domineering. Cruel. This story directly showed the difference between the superior and the inferior completely, without leaving the slightest leeway. A story is a story after all. Jiang Shan was silent for a long time before he whispered. "Yes." Jiang Shangyu said with a smile, "I just suddenly thought of it, so I couldn't help but share it with you." The sun continued to rise, illuminating the entire city. Jiang Shangyu smiled lightly, as if he had not just thought of it and talked about any coldness and cruelty of the dark world. One of his hands was still behind his back, clenched into a fist. His nails pierced the flesh, and the blood flowed down his palm drop by drop, dyeing the ground red. The red was almost dazzling. Jiang Shan seemed to want to say something. But a cell phone suddenly rang. Jiang Shan looked down at the number and his face slightly froze. "Who is it?" Jiang Shangyu asked, keeping his composure. Jiang Shan glanced at him and said calmly, "Gu Xingyun." Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and did not speak. The maneuver of the two academies in Huading was coming to an end. It was coming to an end, which meant that it was not officially over. However, the content of the maneuver on the first day was too shocking. The battle between the young invincible realm expert and the expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm almost overshadowed the limelight of the next maneuver. Moreover, the first place had been reserved by the East Emperor Palace early, so the whole maneuver was boring. Fewer and fewer heavyweight guests went to the Sky Academy to watch the maneuver. However, as the god of war of Zhongzhou State, Gu Xingyun had to attend the grand event of the special warfare system anyway. Even though his current injury was extremely serious, he would spend most of his time there before the end of the maneuver. What did he mean by suddenly calling at this time? Jiang Shan slowly answered the phone. He had no reason not to answer it. The Jiang family was originally a member of the Prince Group, but in recent years the Prince Group wanted Jiang Shan to leave its base camp in Beijiang. As the two sides gradually drifted apart, Jiang Shan was gradually drawn over by the Special Warfare Group. From this perspective, Gu Xingyun was now the behind-the-scenes boss of the Jiang family. Your Highness, good morning. Jiang Shan answered the phone. In the blink of an eye, he already had a gentle but not flattering smile. Brother Jiang, have you heard what happened in Reki City? Gu Xingyun asked. There were not so many rules within the Special Warfare Group, and Gu Xingyun's address of Jiang Shan seemed casual and intimate. Reki City? Jiang Shan froze for a moment. He was not pretending to be stupid, but he really did not receive any news. It happened not long ago. Gu Xingyun's voice was solemn and complicated. What happened in Reki City had just passed. It was a short period of time. But it was enough for the top figures in Zhongzhou State to know the exact news. Qin Qinghuan was killed by Li Tianlan. What? Jiang Shan was suddenly shocked and subconsciously said, Then the Sword Emperor? Humph! Gu Xingyun snorted coldly. Wang Qinzong miscalculated and was set up by Li Tianlan. Now Qin Qinghuan was killed, and even Wang Tianzong was imprisoned by Li Tianlan. Jiang Shan did not speak for a long time. The impact of this news was indeed too strong. I just spoke to Wang Qinglei on the phone. Gu Xingyun softened his tone and said. Jiang Shan answered indiscriminately, and his mind suddenly became a little chaotic. It seems that the Wang family of Beihai can't do anything for the time being. Even if they do, they won't act rashly before contacting Wang Tianzong. But the Snowdance Corps can't be given to Li Tianlan for nothing. I think we should send someone to replace Qin Qinghuan this time. Gu Xingyun said, I have communicated with Wang Qinglei about this matter, and he agrees in principle. Send someone from the Special Warfare Group? The Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Jiang Shan suddenly felt that something was wrong. Well, it's good, but there's no but. Gu Xingyun interrupted Jiang Shan with a smile. It's a rare opportunity to control part of the power of the Snowdance Corps. I just waited and found the most suitable candidate. Jiang Shan's heart gradually sank. Sure enough, Gu Xingyun said calmly, I think Jiang Shangyu is good. Chapter 487. I think Jiang Shangyu is good. When he said this, Gu Xingyun used a question with an obvious meaning of inquiry. It sounded very polite. But Jiang Shan's face became extremely embarrassed in an instant. The vice marshal and the second in command of the largest special warfare corps in Zhongzhou State were indeed respected. But how could others intervene in the current Snowdance Corps? Qin Qinghuan was Wang Qinglei's direct descendant, and he was killed in front of Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan killed him without hesitation. He did not give Wang Tianzong face. If Gu Xingyun's direct descendant went there, Li Tianlan would not give him face. Now, only Li Tianlan's will was unimpeded in the Snowdance Corps. Jiang Shangyu went to the Snowdance Corps with a high title, but in fact, what was the use? The most important thing was that the chaos in Eastern Europe had completely evolved into a huge vortex that had never been seen in the Dark World in decades. The storm was fierce and the waves never stopped. The invincible realm experts were like non-entities. In the chaos, there was an extremely powerful marshal above them. Was Jiang Shangyu courting death if he went there? Jiang Shan held the mobile phone in his hand tightly and did not speak for a while. Don't get me wrong. Gu Xingyun seemed to know that his proposal was too sudden, so he chuckled and said, I heard that Jiang Shangyu's injury is recovering well, and Li Tianlan is too young in the Snowdance Corps. At first, we planned to give him an old comrade, but Li Tianlan is domineering and doesn't give face to anyone. An old comrade can't control him, so it's better to find a young man to go to Eastern Europe to gain experience. Today, among the young generation, Jiang Shangyu is the best. It's good for his growth to go to Eastern Europe to experience some things. At the very least, even if he loses, it's nothing. Jiang Shan's face was cloudy. Jiang Shangyu clearly heard Gu Xingyun's voice. He narrowed his eyes, nodded, and said in an imperceptible voice, "I'm going to Eastern Europe." "Agree with him." Jiang Shan was stunned and looked at his son. Jiang Shangyu nodded hard. Jiang Shan took a deep breath. He really didn't know how to refuse Gu Xingyun's proposal. The Jiang family had been unstable in recent years. Jiang Shan was in the decision-making committee. Although he was very prominent, after he gave up the position of Black Tortoise, one of the four spirits, a few years ago, the Jiang family became even weaker. After drifting away from the prince group, Jiang Shan never approached the Wang family of Beihai. Now he could only approach the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xingyun step by step. At this time he could not refuse any of Gu Xingyun's requests. Jiang Shan also knew in his heart that he should always submit a proof of allegiance. Just let Jiang Shangyu go to Eastern Europe? Jiang Shan felt that he couldn't bear the risk of proving his loyalty. Jiang Shangyu nodded calmly with a smile, once again confirming his thoughts. Jiang Shan took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Since your highness thinks so highly of Xiaoyu, I have no objection. I will let him go to Eastern Europe." "All right." Gu Xingyun smiled. His smile was extremely happy. "Tell him for me. After returning from Eastern Europe, I'll give him a big surprise." Jiang Shan silently hung up the phone and looked at Jiang Shangyu. After a long silence, he slowly said, "Tell me what you think." "Eastern Europe, I have to go and have a look. I've been suffering from no suitable identity before. Since Gu Xingyun has sent the identity to me, why shouldn't I accept it?" Jiang Shangyu chuckled. "Is it really so easy to accept this identity?" Jiang Shan narrowed his eyes, and there was already a hint of anger in his tone. "It's not too difficult." Jiang Shangyu chuckled and said, "I don't know how Qin Xingwan died, but I still have some understanding of Li Tianlan. If he is not in the right, he will never take action. So it's not difficult to guess how Qin Xingwan died. If I go to Eastern Europe, I may represent the position of Kunlun City and Special Exhibition Group, but I first represent my own position. I'm the vice marshal and I follow the marshal's orders. As long as I do well, I don't have to worry about Li Tianlan giving me trouble. Dad, don't forget that Li Tianlan and I have cooperation." "Naive." Jiang Shan sneered. "Let's not talk about anything else. Let's talk about your current realm. The Thundershocking realm is not stable. How can you serve as the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps? Any high-level member of the Snowdance Corps is at least at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. In terms of realm, you can't convince the public. What's the point? Is the realm so important?" Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. His voice was strangely quiet. Jiang Shan paused subconsciously. "Don't worry, Dad. The realm is not a problem. Don't forget my injury?" He chuckled with indescribable comfort. "It's much better. Even if we don't talk about the realm, how can things be so simple? Qin Xingwan was killed in front of Wang Tianzong, and Li Tianlan was safe and sound. It can indeed explain a lot of problems. But do you think Qin Xingwan wants to do some things? He can't violate the will of the Wang family of Beihai when he is in the Wang family of Beihai. Can you violate the will of Kunlun City when you are in Kunlun City?" Jiang Shan said in a low voice, "I can't help it. In fact, many people don't understand one thing. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, except for a few people, no one can help it." Jiang Shangyu said calmly, "Because they won't understand what will happen after the chaos in Eastern Europe." Jiang Shan frowned and seriously thought about his son's words. "In recent years we have all been very depressed, and so has Li Tianlan. Only when an era is about to end can a new era be created. But during this period, for those who have the ability to create a new era, it is depressing. No one denies Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong's strength and power. But although they stand in a high position, they are not omnipotent." Jiang Shangyu said seriously. "What do you want to do?" Jiang Shan frowned and warned, "Don't mess around." "I don't intend to mess around, but I also need to create the opportunity our Jiang family needs in Eastern Europe. I cooperate with Li Tianlan because we have a common demand, to let this era pass." Jiang Shangyu looked up at the bright sunshine and white clouds in the sky. The air in Jiang City was very good. The sky was high and the clouds were light. It was blue and extremely pure. "The weather is good today." Jiang Shangyu suddenly said, "But there's still a shadow." Jiang Shan looked at his son in a daze, with a complicated look in his eyes. Jiang Shangyu looked into the distance and stared in the direction of Eastern Europe. He was silent for a long time. Gu Xingyun said that he had communicated with Wang Qinglei. In fact, this was not completely accurate. To be precise, the communication between Gu Xingyun and Wang Qinglei was not over. Even when he called Jiang Shan, Wang Qinglei was sitting opposite him. In the beginning, it was Wang Qinglei who wanted Jiang Shanyu to be the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. This recommendation was unexpected for Jiang Shan. It was also unexpected for Gu Xingyun. Even if he hung up the phone, Gu Xingyun did not figure out why Wang Qinglei recommended Jiang Shanyu. What did Jiang Shan say? Wang Qinglei picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, chuckling softly. The two were now in the VIP room of the Sky Academy. The final maneuver was coming to an end. 1/3 of the individual maneuver had passed, and there was less than an hour before the official start of today. What can he say? Gu Xingyun shook his head and coughed. He can't refuse. That's true. Wang Qinglei laughed, narrowed his eyes and said, I hope Jiang Shanyu can surprise us. His tone was somewhat meaningful. He was probably the only one who knew what this so-called surprise was. What? Gu Xingyun's eyes narrowed and he glanced at Wang Qinglei calmly. Because I want to remind you that the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan's resurgence seriously threaten not only the Wang family of Beihai but also Kunlun City. Wang Qinglei said indifferently, now the Wang family of Beihai is under a lot of pressure in Eastern Europe. Chen Qinghuan's death directly made us lose the right to speak in the Snowdance Corps. At this time, Kunlun City naturally has to show some sincerity. It's not just our business to deal with the Li family. I mean, why Jiang Shanyu? Gu Xingyun asked attentively, and there was a flash of doubt in his eyes. Wang Qinglei was stunned, and then he couldn't help laughing. Because he is capable enough. Since the old comrade can't control Li Tianlan, he naturally has to send young people to suppress the old comrade. Li Tianlan is domineering. If he can't tolerate new young colleagues, it means that he can't tolerate people. This will affect many people's view of Li Tianlan. I also hope to see this. Since we send young people, they naturally have to be able to speak in front of Li Tianlan. Wang Qinglei looked into Gu Xingyun's eyes and said thoughtfully, if you don't send Jiang Shanyu, are you willing to let Gu Hanshan go there? Gu Xingyun's expression froze slightly, and he lowered his head to drink tea. He was really reluctant. Gu Hanshan was the heir he had high hopes for. Although his realm was not low now, it was obvious that he could not cope with the situation in Eastern Europe. In this way, Jiang Shanyu was indeed the most suitable candidate. After tonight, what do you think of the situation in Eastern Europe? Wang Qinglei looked at Gu Hanshan and said, if the Shadow Throne withdraws from Eastern Europe and faces the Li family again, we will lose a considerable part of our support. It can even be said that we will suffer heavy losses. Isn't that what you want? Gu Xingyun said indifferently, I heard that King Tong and Wang Tianzong have a very good relationship. The discord between Wang Qinglei and Wang Tianzong had become more and more obvious. This was the biggest hidden danger within the Wang family of Beihai. In many people's view, it was only a matter of time before Wang Qinglei seized power. He was just waiting for an opportunity. If the Shadow Throne suffered a heavy blow this time, when Wang Qinglei seized power in the future, Wang Tianzong would have one less ally. This was a good thing in any case. But the problem is that I want Eastern Europe more. Wang Qinglei said with a smile, Li Tianlan, damn it. Gu Xingyun replied with a hum and did not speak. Wang Qinglei hesitated for a moment and said calmly, I heard that Kunlun City hit a sword move after the treason case. Is that sword move now in Eastern Europe? Gu Xingyun looked up at Wang Qinglei with sharp eyes. Killing Li Tianlan with that sword move complements each other. Wang Qinglei commented. The sword is out of the mountain. What can I do? Gu Xingyun was silent for a while and shook his head in a self-mocking manner. You don't mean it? Wang Qinglei said. Gu Xingyun did not speak, but looked at the huge globe placed in the lounge. On the globe, the pattern of Eastern Europe fell into Gu Xingyun's eyes. Gu Xingyun looked at it quietly and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 488. There was no sign or brewing. It seemed that when everyone was not mentally prepared, Reki City, which had calmed down after the turmoil, suddenly boiled up in the heavy rain. Intense explosions and roars spread throughout the entire city. The Caesar Hotel, which was dozens of floors high, completely collapsed under the dense bombardment of artillery shells. The huge stairs were shattered into countless boulders that fell to the ground. Countless buildings in the entire block collapsed in the violent tremors. It was like the end of the world. The elites belonging to the Shadow Throne struggled frantically in the ruins of the huge hotel. The rain under the curtain of the night became more and more violent. The heavy rain dispersed the vast smoke and dust. Blood flowed unscrupulously along the rain in the ruins. King Tong's figure landed on the ground. Looking at everything around her, her eyes suddenly turned red. The Shadow Throne was one of the strongest forces in Europe. It had far-reaching influence, strong strength, and a streamlined organization. This force could be unscrupulous in most European countries. Its development model was simply perfect. Because of this, the Shadow Throne had always attracted experts from all walks of life in the Dark World to join it. This was also the reason why the Shadow Throne was extremely terrifying in the hearts of the people in the Dark World. Although King Tong's strength was not high on the divine list. The Wang family of Beihai had the Sword Emperor who dominated the world. The Jiang family of South America had Black Tortoise with unparalleled defense. The Vatican had more than 1 billion believers as its foundation. As for the Shadow Throne, many experts and top talents in different fields had built their own strong and stable cornerstone. King Tong, who was known as the Queen, was only in the middle of the divine list. But Shadow Throne had the most thunder-shocking realm experts among all the superpowers in the Dark World. The Shadow Throne had bet heavily on the chaos in Eastern Europe. Whether Wang Tianzong needed them to break the trap or not, King Tong needed enough strength to get the interests of Eastern Europe or to bet on the future interests of the Shadow Throne. Therefore, King Tong had invested a lot in Reki City. Not counting the secret base outside Reki City. In the Caesar Hotel alone, there were more than 30 thunder-shocking realm experts and more than 200 fire-flaming realm elites. All in all, plus the ice-condensing realm. A Caesar Hotel accommodated thousands of elites of the Shadow Throne. Such a huge investment, when they were unprepared, was almost defeated by Wulan State, which they despised the most. The heavy rain, together with the strong smell of blood, continued to spread. His ears were filled with frenzied roars. All King Tong's orders had been completely drowned out by the huge sound waves. In front of him were all the troops of Wulan State, fully armed and armed. War needs no declarations. The moment the Caesar Hotel collapsed and the Shadow Throne experts stood up from the ruins, the violent gunshots that shook the sky rang out continuously. Anger surged in his heart and spread throughout his entire body. In her extreme anger and resentment, King Tong calmed down like never before. In recent years, the Shadow Throne relied on the largest number of thunder-shocking realm experts to dominate the Dark World. Everyone in the Dark World knew that King Tong was the queen. But King Tong rarely made a move. Therefore, the entire Dark World seemed to have forgotten what a queen was. A hail of bullets. Countless bullets whizzed over, occupying almost every inch of space. A ray of light suddenly lit up in front of the hotel ruins. The light spread rapidly with King Tong as the center. The entire ruins were instantly illuminated. King Tong disappeared from everyone's sight, and the light spread into a halo. In everyone's sight, the halo spread like water ripples. The blazing white light carried endless heat. Thunder, raging fire, and ice were surging in the halo. All the roars seemed to disappear for a moment. In the moment of incomparable silence, King Tong's voice occupied all of them. She was dignified, calm, and indifferent. Gather. Boom. After a moment of silence, the roar sounded again. King Tong suddenly took a step forward and rushed forward. Her long golden hair seemed to be burning and danced wildly. Her figure appeared in the center of the halo. She was a little delicate, but at this moment she seemed to have blocked the ruins of the entire Caesar Hotel behind her. It was raining heavily. Bullets flew everywhere. Wherever the halo passed, the rain and bullets completely disappeared. The night sky was extremely clear, and there was only light. The army of Wulan State, which surrounded the Caesar Hotel, seemed to subconsciously pause. In less than a second, King Tong rushed over. The halo around her, which had spread to 100 meters, also rushed over. The light was like a waterfall and it was vast. The halo, which had been condensed to the extreme, suddenly exploded in front of the army of Wulan State. There was a sudden crackling sound in front of the ruins. The halo suddenly exploded at the forefront of the crowd. A large area of deep blue and raging fire occupied everyone's sight in an instant. The deep blue thunderbolt was wrapped in the halo. At first there was only one, but the moment it touched the human body, it spread wildly. The thunderbolt was almost endless and linked to the group of troops. The raging fire was surging and the ice was condensed. An extremely cold wind blew through the silent night. After the sound of the wind, everything in front of the ruins of the hotel became completely quiet. King Tong looked coldly at the army of Wulan State in front of her. The moment when the halo spread was very short. But in the blink of an eye, the bodies of hundreds of soldiers who were shrouded by the halo were completely stiff. Everyone's weapons and equipment were completely damaged, their clothes were tattered, and their bodies were scorched black. The evaporated rain curtain fell again. The night wind was as cold as a knife, blowing the rain curtain askew. The raindrops fell on the crowd, and the sound of condensation rang out. In everyone's sight, the feet of hundreds of troops who had been swept by the halo began to freeze. The thick ice spread from their feet to their whole bodies, and finally they were completely frozen in ice. There was silence in front of the ruins. Countless soldiers of Wulan State looked at this scene in horror. The ice blocks that sealed the human bodies suddenly ignited with raging flames. The raging fire was extremely turbulent, and it seemed to have an unimaginable high temperature. In an instant, the soldiers who were frozen in the ice were burned to ashes. The rain was still falling, but it became extremely hot. The hot rain quickly melted the ice. A large amount of ashes scattered on the ground and were washed away by the rain. Hundreds of soldiers completely lost all traces of their existence. If it weren't for the large empty space in front of King Tong, it would have been as if nothing had happened in front of the ruins. All the soldiers of Wulan State who saw this scene with their own eyes felt extremely cold. One figure after another rushed out of the ruins of the hotel, and the elites of the Shadow Throne began to gather toward King Tong. Everyone knew that they should stop this. But no one dared to move and no one dared to give the order. King Tong took another step forward. The army of Wulan State, which occupied almost the entire block, took a step back in unison. In the past 10 years, Wulan State had never had its own invincible realm expert. Even the Rekvia family, which dominated the fate of Wulan State, did not have an invincible realm expert. The tyrant they could drive was the leader of the entire Polar Ground Alliance. Everyone knew that there were invincible realm experts in the Dark World. In the eyes of many half-step invincible realm experts, only the top 5 on the divine list, that was, the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, could be called gods. But in the eyes of ordinary troops, the invincible realm itself was synonymous with gods. It was the first time for all the troops of Wulan State to fight with an invincible realm expert tonight. In the face of this kind of power that could almost destroy heaven and earth, no one would not be afraid. Ice-condensed tomb. Less than a block away from the Caesar Hotel, Qin Shilai, the dark swordsman of Eastern Europe, looked at the proud and cold King Tong on the screen. After a long time he sighed softly. Ice-condensed tomb was a kind of change in the domain of the invincible realm. It was equivalent to integrating a warrior's martial arts path in an instant and breaking out in an instant. Cold wind, cold ice, raging fire, and thunder. All the characteristics of the 4 realms of martial arts were completely integrated and turned into light. Pure light would eventually become a power that destroyed everything. It was the unique skill of King Tong in front of him. Ice-condensed tomb. This unique skill was famous in Europe and even the entire Dark World. But it did not originate from Rothschild. It originated from the Vatican. The Vatican also had a unique skill called ice-condensed tomb, because the Rothschild family had produced 2 popes in a row. But after many years of inheritance, only Rothschild's ice-condensed tomb was the most authentic and original. Qin Shilai replayed the process of King Tong's attack again. He narrowed his eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. "Your Highness, what should we do now?" Prime Minister Rieker stood beside Qin Shilai. He hesitated for a moment and couldn't help asking. They were now only a block away from the Caesar Hotel. It was an underground space that would not be noticed at all on weekdays. It belonged to an intelligence department under the National Defense of Wulan State. It was well equipped and close to the Caesar Hotel. So it naturally became the headquarters of all the operations tonight. There was a busy scene everywhere in the headquarters. The top talents of the military of Wulan State kept answering the phone, mobilizing military forces and armaments. There was a huge screen that occupied the entire wall in the headquarters. At this time, the screen had been connected to the satellite of Wulan State. The entire streets and alleys of Reki City were reflected on the screen. At this moment, every street in Reki City was filled with troops. All the troops were slowly gathering in the direction of the Caesar Hotel like a torrent. Hearing Rieker's question, Qin Shilai froze for a moment and then laughed. "Prime Minister Rieker, you shouldn't ask me this question. Isn't the current situation simple enough? We've hit the main force of the Shadow Throne in the fiercest way. What should we do next? Do you still expect to negotiate? Of course, let your army attack and compress the living space of the Shadow Throne with the greatest force." But Rieker trembled all over. Although he was a little embarrassed, he still chose to tell the truth. But there are no invincible realm experts in Wulan State now. There were more than no invincible realm experts in Wulan State now. On the date of death, the Snowdance Corps marched and Rekvia changed dramatically. A considerable part of the thunder-shocking realm experts in Wulan State were killed by Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps. Wulan State was extremely valuable in the Dark World, but its status was not high. After the Great Change on the date of death, their special warfare force was even less. Everyone knew that in the war, only an invincible realm expert could restrain an invincible realm expert. Wulan State now had a lot of troops. But it was not invincible. And King Tong was standing there. Of course, Rieker knew that it was impossible to talk to the Shadow Throne now. But if they attacked, who would restrain King Tong? We don't have anyone who can restrain King Tong, Rieker said in a low voice. Qin Shilai quietly looked at the picture of the Caesar Hotel before 9 o'clock on the screen. After a long time he nodded and said, Rieker frowned. He originally wanted Qin Shilai to continue speaking, but after waiting for a long time, he didn't see any reaction from him. He took a deep breath and could only take the initiative to ask, Your Highness, can you go to the Caesar Hotel and restrain them? No. Qin Shilai shook his head. Rieker looked at Qin Shilai blankly and said nothing. Now it's not the right time. Qin Shilai said seriously, This is His Highness's plan. I know when I should take action. I really can't do it now. But, Rieker frowned tightly. There are no invincible realm experts in Wulan State. Qin Shilai was silent for a few seconds. Who said that only invincible realm experts can restrain invincible realm experts? He gently touched the sword in his arms and said lightly. This sentence was very light. But in Rieker's ears, it was extremely indifferent. Rieker's body shook violently and he said in a dry voice, Your Highness, what do you mean? They can do it too. Qin Shilai pointed to the army of Wulan State on the screen, and there was only calmness in his tone. They are all ordinary troops. Rieker suddenly growled. Yes. Qin Shilai said calmly, but there are many of them. No matter how the war developed, there was always only one obvious advantage. That was, there were many people. Ordinary people were like non-entities in front of an invincible realm expert. They could not stop an invincible realm expert. That was because there were not enough people. An invincible realm expert could kill 1,000 people or 10,000 people, but his strength was limited after all. If he could kill 10,000 people, could he kill 100,000 people? There were indeed no invincible realm experts in Wulan State now. But on the date of death, the Snowdance Corps had crippled nearly half of the military strength of Wulan State, and the remaining half was forced to approach Reki City because of the situation. At this moment, even if there were no invincible realm experts in Reki City, so what? There were many of them. Rieker broke out in a cold sweat and his face was pale. He understood what Qin Shilai meant, but he really didn't want to give this cruel order. Prime Minister Rieker, you must be clear that it's a war now. Since it's a war, how can there be no sacrifice? Some sacrifices at certain times are the most important. We have an advantage now, but it's not so big that it can decide everything. If Wang Qianzong is not in the office of the president, His Highness Li Tianlan can casually mobilize 3,000 members of the Snowdance Corps in charge. Who do you think can stop the Shadow Throne, including King Tong? Qin Shilai patted Rieker on the shoulder and said, I just want to tell you that His Highness Li Tianlan doesn't want to consume the military strength of Reki City, but that the Snowdance Corps has more important things to do. Rieker did not speak. After a long while, he took out his mobile phone with a trembling hand and dialed Li Tianlan's number. The call was quickly connected. Rieker took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Your Highness, there are no invincible realm experts in Wulan State who can restrain King Tong now. Your Highness, please? Ordinary troops can restrain King Tong. Li Tianlan's voice came out of the phone, extremely indifferent. Rieker stayed where he was and his face became more and more embarrassed. Li Tianlan didn't seem to know what Rieker was thinking. He just said calmly, Rieker, don't underestimate the ordinary army. In many cases we have the general trend. The ordinary army is the power that can decide everything. They can do a lot of things, Li Tianlan chuckled. In Rieker's ears, there was an indescribable cruelty and determination in his laughter. So, I want to ask you another question. How many troops do you have in Reki City tonight? Chapter 489. There is another chapter ahead, 2 chapters today. No one could have expected that Li Tianlan would be so radical. Li Tianlan had asked Rieker twice how many troops he had. After the first time, there was a war in front of the Caesar Hotel at night. Now he asked Rieker for the second time. What did he mean? Rieker was not sure. But he was sure that no matter what Li Tianlan meant, at least it would not be the same as the first time he asked this question. Your Highness, Rieker could clearly hear the trembling in his tone. Now he had no idea of resisting Li Tianlan, and he was powerless to resist. But it seemed that it was not until this moment that he realized who the person who controlled his fate was. He was a complete madman and gambler. He was always staking everything on one throw, always seeking wealth and danger. Such an extreme style could allow him to reach the sky in a single step, but it would also cause him and everyone around him to be consigned to eternal damnation. Now Prime Minister Rieker still had no idea of resisting Li Tianlan. But he was extremely afraid. It was an infinite fear of the future. It's too urgent, Your Highness, Rieker emphasized, and his voice trembled. It was almost a plea. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said calmly, it's a little urgent, but... He seemed to think for a moment and then said, in any case the Shadow Throne must be taken down. Rieker, let your army attack at all costs. His tone was very indifferent. But he was very determined, and there was no room for negotiation. Rieker answered in a daze, yes. On the screen in front of him, King Tong took another step forward. There was a busy phone call in the headquarters. Several military advisors of Wulan State came over to ask him for instructions on the next step. Rieker quietly looked at his own army on the screen. His insides were twisted into a ball. Everyone knew that things had come to this point, and there would be no second order. The only order was to attack. But before Rieker spoke, no one dared to give this order. This was equivalent to letting a large number of soldiers die. Now the number of troops that Reki City could mobilize was as high as 50,000. 50,000 people rushed up at the same time. Not to mention King Tong, even Wang Tianzong could not resist them. King Tong could naturally set off a storm of blood alone and barely kill her way out. But the problem was that she was not alone. She was the queen of the Shadow Throne. Behind her were thousands of elites from the Shadow Throne. Reki City was now under the gaze of the whole world. How could King Tong retreat? He could not retreat. He could only fight to the death. Li Tianlan was in front of Rieker, so he could not retreat. There was a Shadow Throne behind King Tong, so she could not retreat. Tonight, no matter who won or lost, Reki City was destined to be flooded with blood. Rick slowly shifted his gaze and looked at the others in the command center. Almost everyone was observing him, intentionally or unintentionally, waiting for his orders. Rick slowly clenched his fists, took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, at all costs. When Li Tianlan hung up the phone, Wang Tianzong was still standing in the courtyard, quietly looking in the direction of the Caesar Hotel. The Caesar Hotel was very tall. Standing in the presidential palace, one could see the brilliant lights of the Caesar Hotel. But now, the brilliant lights had completely disappeared, and the entire Caesar Hotel had completely collapsed. Wang Tianzong stood there and no one knew what he was thinking. In Li Tianlan's perception, Wang Tianzong in this state was completely like a cloud, quiet, illusory and also unfathomable. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong's back in silence. You're in too much of a hurry. Dongqing Rushi walked up to him and said softly, do you think so too? Li Tianlan looked at her and asked. Dongqing Rushi nodded seriously and said, it's too risky. I just have a feeling that it's not good for me to drag on like this. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong's back and said softly, time may not be on my side. The chaos in Eastern Europe should end as soon as possible. Wang Tianzong made him feel heavier and heavier but lighter and lighter. He could not understand the specific charm of this feeling for the time being. But now he could see the end of martial arts. He could sense that Wang Tianzong was moving towards the end of martial arts step by step. He walked very slowly with small steps. But he was also very close to the end. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in the next second, Wang Tianzong might cross that line. If Wang Tianzong really succeeded in breaking through, everything he and the Snowdance Corps had done in Eastern Europe would become meaningless. You don't like Eastern Europe? Dongqing Rushi said softly. They didn't like Eastern Europe before because they didn't like Li Tianlan to come to Eastern Europe. But now it was completely different. After the date of death, Li Tianlan took down Wulan State. His great achievements had completely established Li Tianlan's position. No one denied that the chaos in Eastern Europe was extremely dangerous, but Li Tianlan now had the qualification to play with other superpowers in the chaos. On this stage, Li Tianlan could get a lot of things. It's not a matter of liking it or not. Li Tianlan said, we've taken down Wulan State so there's no need to waste time here. Only when I return to Zhongzhou State and Tianan can my everything really begin. He sighed softly and said, I want to go back to China. Dongqing Rushi didn't speak, but hugged Li Tianlan gently from behind. Wang Qianzong moved his body and turned back to the room. When he returned to the room, he reached out again and took out the instrument in his hand with a calm expression. Li Tianlan's heart sank for no reason. If that instrument meant the mysterious devil troop of the Wang family of Beihai. So when Wang Qianzong stood in the courtyard just now, was he looking at the Caesar Hotel or waiting for a signal? Li Tianlan suddenly realized that in the chaos in Eastern Europe, time would not be on his side. Even tonight, time might not be on his side. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and felt the warmth and elasticity of Dongqing Rushi against his back. He reached out and held her hand around him, then said softly, "Help me contact the Dark Knights now." The battle between Wulan State and the Shadow Throne was destined to be tragic. Tragic often meant lasting. Now Li Tianlan just wanted to end the battle as soon as possible. But he needed a force that could enter this battlefield and completely break the deadlock. Tonight he contacted the Vatican, the Heroes Club, the Fantasy World, the Men in Black and all the superpowers in the Dark World. At this time Wulan State and the Shadow Throne were locked in a fierce battle. As long as a superpower joined in, other superpowers would attack the Shadow Throne together. At present the Dark Knights were the only candidate. The Dark Knights had been the firmest and most reliable ally of the Samsara Palace in recent years. Now they naturally became Li Tianlan's ally. Only if they took the initiative to stand up and break the deadlock could there be a real possibility of a quick end to everything tonight. Chapter 490. In the mysterious and chaotic Northern Europe, for hundreds of years, even the children who had just become sensible knew the legends about darkness that were circulating in Northern Europe. Darkness was everywhere. The rich black slowly penetrated into every corner of Northern Europe in the deepest and heaviest way. The Nordic Council, governments, special warfare organizations, major enterprises, military industry, finance, intelligence, transportation, clothing, food, housing, transportation, and even daily necessities. Everything in Northern Europe had a vague shadow of darkness. And the source of all this was the Dark World, which also lay in faith. There were also many extremely devout believers of the Vatican in Northern Europe. In the eyes of believers, this was a place where it was extremely difficult for the glory of God to spread. In this area, every year members of the Vatican above the level of bishop would be killed, nuns would disappear for no reason, and churches would be attacked. All of this was because there was darkness here. Very few people knew what the so-called darkness was. It was a person. It was a business or a religion. Ordinary people couldn't describe it specifically, so darkness became a legend. Only people in the Dark World knew that the darkness in Northern Europe, to be exact, was a force. A force with a long and ancient heritage. Elite, tough, mysterious, cold-blooded, powerful and gloomy. They might be evil, but no one could deny their strength and influence on Northern Europe. This was a group of knights who traveled alone in the dark. People called them the Dark Knights, and the commander of the Dark Knights in the Northern European legend was the famous Light Crusher. Raphael Wilson, the commander of the Dark Knights. In Northern Europe, this name was like a nightmare and his code name was Nightmare. A man who had attacked the Vatican many times for decades, involved nearly half of the elites of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican in Northern Europe, and could even escape from Arsis unscathed. In other words, Raphael Wilson, the commander of the Dark Knights, was the biggest heretic in the eyes of the Vatican in recent decades. In the hundreds of years of history of the Dark Knights, Raphael might not be the strongest commander, but he did single-handedly raise the status of the Dark Knights to the peak. When the Dark Saint Spear, one of the 12 murderous weapons, could be fired, Raphael was almost fearless in the Dark World with the Dark Saint Spear in his hand. The Dark Saint Spear fired 3 years ago. It was still in the charging period. And the main reason why the Dark Saint Spear opened fire was for the Samsara Palace, or the Master of Samsara Palace. Now that Li Tianlan could face Qin Weibai's identity, he naturally knew some of the past and secrets of the Samsara Palace and the Dark Knights. For him, as long as he still trusted Qin Weibai, he would not doubt Raphael. On the night of August 17th, when the whole Reki city was in turmoil, it was also the first time that Li Tianlan saw the commander of the Dark Knights, whom he had known for a long time. Raphael was less than 50 years old this year. He was considered young among the experts of the Invincible Realm, and he looked even younger. This famous nightmare in Northern Europe was a Eurasian. He was tall and slender, handsome and well-defined. He looked like a young man in his 30s. His every move was full of power. This was a man who was extremely charming in both appearance and temperament. He was neither overbearing nor cold. His smile was very kind, but it was not fake. It was a kind of natural sincerity and calmness. Your Highness Raphael, I'm Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan bowed slightly and said in a calm tone. Raphael did not have the slightest arrogance of an expert on the divine list. He also bowed slightly and said with a gentle smile, "It's the first time we've met. Marshal Li, you're really outstanding." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Dongqing Rushi, who was behind him and paying attention to the conversation, was a little surprised. Because Raphael was using Chinese. And it was the most standard Mandarin. His pronunciation was clear and casual, without any accent. Zhongzhou State was the most powerful country in the world. All countries were learning Chinese. There were many foreigners who could speak Chinese, but foreigners who could speak such standard Mandarin were extremely rare. Moreover, although Raphael was a Eurasian, the information showed that he was the descendant of a French and a Japanese woman. He had nothing to do with Zhongzhou State at all. But now, Dongqing Rushi even suspected that Raphael's Japanese might not be as good as his Chinese. Your Chinese is very good. Li Tianlan smiled and praised him. I like Zhongzhou State. It's the most mysterious and powerful place in the world. But unfortunately, I didn't have any friends in Zhongzhou State before, and no one welcomed me there. Raphael laughed softly. He was sitting in a somewhat dark hall. The light was very dim, but his voice was very warm. Friend? Now you have one. Li Tianlan nodded. After the matter in Eastern Europe is over, I hope that your Highness can come to Zhongzhou State to have a look. At that time I will personally be your tour guide. Ah. Raphael laughed happily, and the constant roar became clearer and clearer in his laughter. The roar came from Li Tianlan's side and from the other side of the screen. This meant that Raphael was also very close to the Caesar Hotel. Raphael glanced out of the window and suddenly said thoughtfully, Marshal Li, Reki City is very lively tonight. Yes, Prime Minister Rieker talked to me. It is said that there is a group of terrorists in the Caesar Hotel who intend to overthrow the rule of the entire Wulan state. Since Prime Minister Rieker got the news, he must crack down on them. Li Tianlan talked nonsense with a serious face. He was indeed talking nonsense. Raphael also knew that, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was a reason. This kind of reason didn't even need to be true or false. It only needed to be reasonable. In Reki City, the Prime Minister of Wulan State was reasonable. He thought that the Shadow Throne was a terrorist and sent troops directly. This was also reasonable. Raphael was silent for a while, then nodded and smiled. Prime Minister Rieker is very bold, and Marshal Li is also very generous. Li Tianlan lowered his head and lit a cigarette. In the smoke, he was silent for a while and suddenly said, But now it seems that our preparation is not enough. Things are too hasty. At present, Prime Minister Rieker has encountered some difficulties. Raphael looked at Li Tianlan quietly. He did not avoid any topic and asked straightforwardly, What do you need me to do? His voice was calm and direct, as if he was ready for anything. Even though Li Tianlan knew that the other party was really one of his own, he did not expect that Raphael would be so straightforward. He was slightly stunned and said softly, Your Highness, if you can rush to the Caesar Hotel now, I can guarantee that the Dark Knights will get the greatest kindness from Wulan State. Raphael was stunned and said hesitantly, Now? He was not hesitating but a little worried. He looked at Li Tianlan sincerely and said, Is it too hasty? Time is of the essence. I have no choice. Li Tianlan said softly. Okay. Raphael took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said, I'll take someone there myself. Li Tianlan nodded silently and said calmly, Well, the Snowdance Corps is currently... Raphael waved his hand with a smile, stood up and said, Since time is of the essence, there's no need to give me a reason. I'll go there now. Marshal Li, I believe in you. Li Tianlan silently put out the cigarette butt. On the screen, Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, had turned around and was ready to leave. Li Tianlan bowed deeply to the screen and said calmly, Thank you, brother-in-law. He now had two brothers-in-law. The first brother-in-law was still in Jiangxia. He was Zhou Yuanshan, who had taken the first crucial step in the next 20 years. He was Dongqing Rushi's brother-in-law. The second was Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights. This was Qin Weibai's brother-in-law. Who was Qin Weibai's sister? The whole Dark World knew. But no one knew that the Dark Knights, who would stand with the Samsara Palace at the critical moment, were usually aloof and even had occasional conflicts with the Samsara Palace, would have such a close relationship with the Samsara Palace. Raphael paused for a moment and finally burst out laughing. This middle-aged man, who looked elegant and gentle, laughed so heartily for the first time. Perhaps Li Tianlan himself didn't know how important the word brother-in-law was to Raphael. Raphael strode out of the dark hall. He was now less than 6 or 7 kilometers away from the Caesar Hotel. He temporarily lived in an ordinary hotel apartment, and there were no elites of the Dark Knights around him. There were only a few high-level members of the Dark Knights who had followed him from Northern Europe. Outside the hall was a larger hall. In front of the huge French window, several high-level members of the Dark Knights were gathered together, discussing the occasional artillery fire in the night sky with great interest. Raphael stood in front of the railing and took a look. Suddenly he said, "Sin." There was a moment of silence in the hall. Among the high-level members, an extremely thin old man in a tuxedo, who looked to be in his 50s, turned around, bowed and said respectfully, "Your Highness. It's time to take action." Raphael said softly, "Mobilize people from the base and enter Reki City as fast as possible. Tonight we will destroy the Shadow Throne." Only at this moment did he really look like the commander of the Dark Knights, the biggest heretic of the Vatican, instead of the brother-in-law who would grant Li Tianlan's request just now. Everyone was shocked. "How many people should we mobilize?" Sin asked subconsciously. He was now the most senior Dark Knight in the Dark Knights. He had been in the Dark Knights for even longer than Raphael. As the top expert of the half-step invincible realm, his status could be said to be second only to the commander. "All of them," Raphael said lightly. Sin seemed to be too shocked and didn't speak for a while. "Your Highness," an extremely rough figure took a step forward, and his voice became a little cautious. "It's too urgent." He was also one of the high-level members of the Dark Knights. His code name was Fury. More than 3 years ago, before and after the final Battle of Heaven Capital broke out, it was Fury who led the team to the Sky Academy with the Dark Saint Spear and witnessed the battle between the Master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun. Raphael glanced at him, nodded, and said, If we take action later, maybe we can get more," another high-level member said softly. His voice was a little hoarse. His code name was Greed, and what he said was very consistent with his code name. "Maybe we should take a break now. It will be better for us to go there when we have the spirit?" A lazy voice. This was the laziness of the Dark Knights. Fury, greed, arrogance, sloth, envy, gluttony, desire. Sin. Nightmare Raphael. This was the list of the top high-level members of the Dark Knights. Raphael listened quietly to their opinions. When everyone finished speaking, he said calmly, "Are you done?" All the high-level members looked at each other and nodded at the same time. "Then let's take action." Raphael waved his hand. Everyone said, "Oh," and stood up at the same time. Even Sloth, the laziest one, stood up with a sigh. Raphael looked at them quietly without saying a word. Just now, everyone's opposition was not really opposition. The atmosphere of the Dark Knights was like this. They just said what they wanted to say. As the leader, Raphael did not change his mind, so everyone could only take action. "Your Highness, we will take a lot of risks." Sin reminded him one last time. Raphael said, expressionless. Sin sighed softly, took out his mobile phone, and began to call the base of the Dark Knights in Wulan State. The Dark Knights weren't called the Dark Knights in the beginning, but I've long forgotten the original name of this organization. At first, we were like other forces pursuing money and power. Even now it's still the same. It's just that in the beginning we touched the interests of the Vatican, so we became heretics. In desperation we began to rebel against the Vatican. Raphael's voice was calm. "But the Vatican has faith. What about us? Our greatest faith is to go against the Vatican, but what kind of faith is that? We also believe in the Almighty God. What we oppose is only the Vatican. So from this point of view, we are still the same as other forces. What we pursue is money and wealth. Resisting the Vatican is our instinct and also for survival. I don't like this kind of life. The darkness without passion is the most disgusting. Everyone, the Dark Knights will not take any risks because it will always exist. But, in the battle tonight, I can be sure that I am doing something more important than my life. I am doing it for my love. Apart from that, I have no other purpose. Now I ask you to help me. After tonight, maybe I will die and you will die, but the darkness will always exist." The hall became quieter and quieter. Raphael ignored anyone's response. He lowered his head, took out his mobile phone and made a call. The call was quickly connected. A slight breathing sound came from the phone, so gentle. Raphael laughed. His eyes and smile became so soft. "I'll go to the Caesar Hotel right away," Raphael said softly. "Now." The voice on the phone was silent for a while before asking softly, "Yes." Raphael chuckled and said, "Tianlan is looking for me. How can I refuse his brother-in-law's request as his brother-in-law? There was silence on the phone. I'm here too. The female voice on the phone said softly. Then I have to go even more. Raphael said with a smile, no matter what, I have to protect my woman. After a long silence, the master of Samsara Palace said softly on the phone. Raphael's smile was intoxicating, as gentle as wine. After this matter is over, I will agree to your request. On the phone, the voice of the master of Samsara Palace became soft. Okay. Raphael nodded with a smile. So, the master of Samsara Palace muttered to herself, you have to live. Wang Qianzong was also on the phone. The Snowdance Corps could be said to be the most elite army in the world, but Wang Qianzong was also the most powerful sword emperor in the dark world today. If he wanted to break out of the encirclement, it would not be difficult for him to leave here. The most difficult thing was that Li Tianlan occupied the general trend. At least in the general direction, Wang Qianzong and the Snowdance Corps had the same position. They were both forces that belonged to Zhongzhou State. It was impossible for Wang Qianzong to give up the support of Zhongzhou State, so it was impossible for him to fight his way out of the Snowdance Corps. The imprisonment was already a foregone conclusion. Wang Qianzong, who had tasted the feeling of being imprisoned for the first time in his life, returned to his room by himself, but he didn't look angry. Li Tianlan imprisoned his freedom, but he didn't cut off his right to communicate with the outside world. Both sides took a step back. After all, neither Wang Qianzong nor Li Tianlan wanted to drive each other completely crazy. Wang Qianzong had already called King Tong. He even called all the high-level officials he could find in the Shadow Throne. But there was no response. There was no doubt that the signal near the Caesar Hotel had been completely blocked. For now, Wang Qianzong, who had no way to deal with it, calmed down completely and called summer solstice. It was already the morning of August 18th in Zhongzhou State. Summer solstice's call was quickly connected. There was complete silence on the other side of the phone. There was no sound of the waves hitting the cliff, nor was there any soft music when she was playing with flowers and plants. Only summer solstice's light footsteps and her voice sounded, which were extremely clear. I heard about it. Summer solstice took the initiative to say, he did a very clever job this time and everything is reasonable. Qianzong, no matter how unwilling you are, you can't do anything before you have the right opportunity. Wang Qianzong nodded with a smile and said calmly, I didn't intend to do anything. I'll just wait for the opportunity. Summer solstice replied softly. After a moment of silence, she whispered, if you can break through, it will be the best opportunity. Yes. Wang Qianzong whispered, before, I was still considering whether to be quiet or to move. Now I can't move even if I want to. Fate has given me a choice and I have no reason to refuse. Summer solstice was silent. Her soft footsteps rang for a long time, and then she whispered, Qianzong, it's very uncomfortable, isn't it? The dignified sword emperor was imprisoned by a young man who was like an ant in his eyes in terms of strength and background. When had Wang Qianzong ever suffered such humiliation? Summer solstice thought of the entanglement between her daughter and Li Tianlan, and her heart became more and more complicated. Oh. Wang Qianzong smiled and said, I mean it. I'm very close to breaking through. The environment of the office of the president is good. I don't think anyone will disturb me on weekdays. I can take advantage of this period of time to calm down. The outside world is in turmoil and the situation is chaotic. I'm in the middle of it and I can't stay still or move. To be honest, it's better to do it now. It's good that you can figure it out. Summer solstice chuckled. Wang Qianzong was silent for a while before he whispered, Solstice, do something. You can't come to Eastern Europe, but you can contact our country and Rothschild. After tonight, no matter what happens to the Shadow Throne, King Tong must live. This is my bottom line, my bottom line. Summer solstice was silent for a while and whispered, Okay, leave it to me. Wang Qianzong seemed to be completely relieved. He narrowed his eyes and did not speak for a long time. King Tong must live. This was his bottom line. This sentence was said to the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. He was wondering if he should say it to Li Tianlan. He was imprisoned here now because he had to take care of the overall situation. But if Li Tianlan insisted on trampling on his bottom line regardless of the overall situation, Wang Qianzong would naturally take action. This was not a threat. It was just a means of gambling. I'll leave for Yuzhou in the afternoon. Summer solstice said slowly, you'd better communicate with Li Tianlan. He's a little lunatic. If you don't suppress him, King Tong will be in trouble. I know. Wang Qianzong nodded and suddenly said, Where are you now? On the way to the sixth lab. Summer Solstice said calmly. Wang Tianzong fell silent. In the sixth lab. That was the sword forging room of the Wang family of Beihai. It was also the place to debug the murderous weapon Human Emperor. He narrowed his eyes slightly and said calmly, "How's the sword?" "It's almost the same as you." Summer Solstice was a little helpless. Wang Tianzong also smiled bitterly. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, Listen to the Sea, shocked the dark world. However, after Wang Tianzong approached the peak of the invincible realm, Listen to the Sea had gradually become inconvenient because Wang Tianzong's sword intent was too strong. Now that Wang Tianzong had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, he increasingly felt that Listen to the Sea was not as powerful as he wanted. So the Wang family of Beihai started the sword forging plan. The sword forging plan had started earlier. This time, it was just a repetition of the plan from more than 20 years ago. Few people knew that as early as more than 20 years ago, the Wang family of Beihai wanted to build a real peerless magic weapon with its own hands. Or it could be said that it was the real sword of the Chosen One that could perfectly bear the sword intent of the Chosen One. And this time, the swordsmithing project would use the sword embryo that had consumed countless precious materials back then. However, at the beginning of that sword, its owner was not Wang Tianzong. It was a person who was really hopeful and had a great chance to become the Chosen One of the present age. Summer Solstice. This was originally a sword forged for Summer Solstice. Now Wang Tianzong restarted the sword embryo. He wanted to get a sword that could perfectly bear his sword intent when he broke through the last step. What's the suggestion of the sixth lab? Wang Tianzong asked slowly. Our requirements are too high. The peerless magic weapon naturally needs spirituality. In other words, the sword of the Chosen One should be a sword with life. However, the infinite sky was shattered too seriously back then, and it almost lost all its activity. Its spirituality is somewhat insufficient. The only way. Summer Solstice was silent for a while. Wang Tianzong also fell silent. There were few weapons with life, but they were not non-existent. In the dark world there were now 12 weapons with life. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and whispered, "You mean if this sword is completed, it needs to crush the Human Emperor?" At present, this sword needs the spirituality of the Human Emperor. On the other end of the phone, Summer Solstice pushed open the door of the sixth lab. The sixth lab was extremely desolate. In a huge ancient bronze tripod, a thick and broad sword was inserted in it, being tested by various instruments. This was an extremely huge and thick long sword. The long sword was black, 2 meters long, and the blade was very wide. It looked extremely majestic and solemn. Countless patterns were carved on both sides of the black blade. One side of the blade was carved with the sun, the moon, and the stars. The other side of the blade was carved with mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. The huge blade was inserted there quietly, but it seemed to carry the whole world. This was a real peerless magic blade. The sword of the Chosen One. Tianzong, I'm looking forward to the day when you break through. With this sword, you can sweep through the chaotic world. Summer Solstice walked to the black sword, gently stroked the blade, and said in a gentle tone. This was a famous sword that was close to completion. After adding the murderous weapon, the Human Emperor, Summer Solstice fully believed that this would be a new perfect sword that could protect the prosperity of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. Summer Solstice had thought of the name of this sword a long time ago. This sword. It was called Coldness of 9 States. About the Master of Samsara Palace, from her first appearance to this chapter, it seems contradictory, but in fact, there is no contradiction. All the holes about the Samsara Palace will be filled in this volume. About the Master of Samsara Palace, pay attention to Qin Wei Bai, everything. Chapter 491. Summer Solstice hung up the phone. Soon, Wang Tianzong received a video call from Summer Solstice on his mobile phone. Wang Tianzong connected his mobile phone to the screen in the room, and the screen lit up instantly. But what appeared in front of Wang Tianzong was not the face that could calm him the most. It was the huge black sword with the sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas carved on both sides of the blade. The black sword stood on the huge bronze tripod, silent, solemn, majestic, heavy as a mountain, but with unparalleled sharpness. Many famous swords in the world would make people think of many things, good or bad, big or small. But the shape of this sword was so simple. It was a pure sword, just a sword without any adjectives. Because of its purity, the sword looked perfect without any flaws. The sword energy traveled 30,000 miles, and the cold light of the sword suppressed 9 states. Coldness of 9 states. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and looked at the sword on the screen. He was silent for a long time. His eyes were no longer calm or passionate, but with a kind of extremely focused trust and desire. Inside and outside the screen, thousands of miles away, mountains, rivers, and seas. The invincible Sword Emperor. The perfect swords were silent. They seemed to be looking at each other quietly. This is the real invincible sword. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time before he slowly opened his mouth. No one could deny that. Once this sword was born, some people might not recognize Wang Tianzong, but no one would not recognize the coldness of 9 states. Perfection was supposed to be accepted, acknowledged, and even admired and revered by everyone. But it can be more perfect. Summer Solstice's voice sounded off the screen. No one knew whether she was stimulated by the sword energy or other reasons. Although her voice was still gentle, it was a little cold. Wang Tianzong stared at the screen and did not speak for a while. A perfect sword needed spirituality and even its own thoughts. The murderous weapon human emperor, or any murderous weapon, could be said to be a weapon with its own thoughts. The main material for the Wang family of Beihai to cast the coldness of 9 states came from the murderous weapon Infinite Sky that was broken more than 20 years ago. Kunlun City, which had always been eager to have its own murderous weapon, had been collecting materials of Infinite Sky in recent years. In the Battle of Lin, and not long ago, Gu Xingyun was seriously injured by Situ Tsangyue's Setting Sunday. That shot was also equivalent to surrendering the dominance of Setting Sunday. After that, Setting Sun was brought back to Kunlun City. Kunlun City, which had a murderous weapon, felt that it was not interesting to study the Infinite Sky again. However, the materials from Endless Sky were also of great value. These materials were sent to the Wang family of Beihai. The condition was that the Wang family of Beihai should take the lead in the action against Li Tianlan in the chaos in Eastern Europe. Therefore, when the Snowdance Corps went north, the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps was Qin Qingwan. This was a transaction. Both sides were worth it. This transaction also allowed the coldness of the 9 states to enter its final stage. But a broken murderous weapon was still broken. The Endless Sky had almost completely lost its activity. Naturally, it could not compare to a murderous weapon at its peak. The human emperor was the weapon of the Wang family of Beihai that had been passed down for hundreds of years. It could make the coldness of the 9 states completely perfect. However, once the coldness of 9 states was perfected, it meant that there would be no more human emperors in the dark world. The new coldness of the 9 states might still possess all the functions of a human sovereign, but its primary function was the sword. Moreover, even if it possessed the functions of a human sovereign, the coldness of the 9 states would only be the coldness of the 9 states, not the human sovereign. Do you have any suggestions? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. I use a sword, so I only believe in the sword. Summer Solstice replied softly. The human sovereign was a spear. Its power was the best in the dark world. Even in the hands of an ordinary invincible realm expert, it could instantly burst out the power of a peak invincible realm expert or even beyond the peak invincible realm expert. This was an extremely terrifying trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. Powerful, mysterious, with a strong aura of death. But the human sovereign was not perfect, because its charging period was too long. However, during the time when the human sovereign was still charging, Wang Tianzong could only hold Listen to the Sea. Listen to the Sea was a famous sword. But today in Wang Tianzong's realm, Listen to the Sea was no longer trustworthy. Wang Tianzong took another look at the coldness of the 9 states on the screen. Summer Solstice started the giant bronze tripod. The huge bronze tripod began to spin. The dark sword body was also spinning. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas carved on the blade became more vivid and heavy. When the blade turned, it seemed to be the entire Wang family of Beihai. The sky and the sea. Wang Tianzong stared at the coldness of the 9 states seriously. After a long time, he nodded and said, I agree. It was from this moment on. The era when the Wang family of Beihai shocked the world with the power of the human sovereign finally began to end. The future of the Wang family of Beihai would be on the sword edge of the coldness of the 9 states. The sword energy was 30,000 miles long. One sword could suppress 9 states. Wang Tianzong silently hung up the video call. Both the human sovereign and the coldness of the 9 states would be recast tonight. With absolutely precious materials. With the human sovereign and the wreckage of the endless sky. With the technology of the Wang family of Beihai, the coldness of the 9 states would become a unique world-shaking sword in the dark world in the shortest time. But, the human sovereign was gone. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes and felt the subtle gain and loss. He was silent for a long time. He even began to recall the path he had taken. from childhood to the past to the present and to the future. He thought of the glory when he held the human sovereign. He thought of the silence and loss when he was learning swordsmanship in his childhood. He thought of the feeling of being at a loss when he first entered the invincible realm, instead of being high-spirited. But what he thought more was how to lead the future of the Wang family of Beihai with the coldness of the 9 states in his hand without the descendant of the human sovereign. He was in the office of the president now. He was invincible in the world. There were many of his opponents. Deity, Lin Fengting, Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan, and all the super forces. Wang Qinzong finally admitted this. No one in the dark world was his opponent now. But in the general trend, everyone who could dominate the situation here was his opponent. At this moment, Wang Qinzong seemed to have walked down from the throne he had been sitting for a long time and finally found his humbleness. He put himself in the same position as everyone else. His mind was extremely clear and his heart was in awe. Perhaps even Wang Qinzong himself did not know how terrifying he would be when he lowered his posture and observed everything carefully. In the end, he thought of the coldness of the 9 states that had never been born. The sword emperor that was infinitely close to the chosen one. The divine sword that was infinitely close to perfection. Neither was worthy. They did not match. Both the sword and the man should be one step closer. Wang Qinzong's eyes became calm. Outside the office of the president, the roar that shook the whole city had gradually disappeared. But the whole Reki city was getting more and more chaotic. Countless people roared and screamed wildly. The messy gunshots pierced through the wind and rain and entered his ears. Wang Qinzong slowly closed the window, turned around, sat on the bed and began to meditate. He had no way to leave here now. The war was still going on in the outside world. But there was no real result, so no one touched his bottom line for the time being. As long as King Tong was alive, Wang Qinzong could accept this failure. It was useless to think too much. The only thing he could do now was to cultivate. And cultivation was the only thing he could do in his life. There was often only a thin line between heaven and hell. The same was true for wealth and poverty. Mandy Street was a famous slum in Reki City. It was huge, chaotic, and dirty. Closely connected to Mandy Street was the most luxurious Lair Street in Reki City. Lair Street had the most spacious streets and the most luxurious buildings in Reki City. It also gathered the most wealth. The Caesar Hotel, one of the most luxurious hotels in Reki City, was located in Lair Street. The 2 blocks were closely connected, so most of the time, sitting in any corner of Mandy Street and looking up, one could see the brilliant lights of the luxurious Caesar Hotel. On the stormy night of August 17th, the lights of the Caesar Hotel disappeared. Chaotic explosions and war broke out abruptly. Countless people in Mandy Street, who usually made a living at the bottom of Reki City, had fled to different blocks in chaos. There were fewer and fewer people in Mandy Street. In the end, there were only 2 very narrow houses that still had a faint light. These 2 families could be said to be the newest residents in Mandy Street. There were no more than 12 people in the 2 families. There were men and women, and their behavior was a little strange. They had been here for nearly a month, but all the residents nearby had never heard them say a word. Such indifference was not only to outsiders. Even their own people did not speak at all. Many people thought they were mutes. However, such a strange thing that was enough to attract a lot of people's attention in ordinary days had not been noticed at all in the past month. The chaos in Eastern Europe had broken out. All of Eastern Europe, even the civilians, were paying attention to the fate of Eastern Europe. Who would be willing to listen to the stories behind a dozen or so Asian mute people? The residents of Mandy Street were running for their lives amidst the loud explosions. The 2 houses with lights still on were still quiet. There were fewer and fewer people in the slums. In the end, the lights in the 2 houses also began to go out. The street was dead silent. In the extinguished lights, the 12 mutes, who had aroused the curiosity of many people, were still standing in their rooms, looking in the direction of the Caesar Hotel. The Caesar Hotel had completely disappeared. But the strong smell of gunpowder gradually spread to Mandy Street. Amidst the silence, a mechanical voice suddenly sounded, "Action?" After a short silence, another voice sounded, "Wait." The conversation ended. The long silence continued to elapse. 10 minutes, half an hour, an hour. No one spoke. The living room was so quiet that there was no sound of breathing. "Action." Another voice abruptly rang out. Before anyone spoke, a signal that was hard to see with the naked eye suddenly spread in the air. The 12 figures standing quietly in the darkness instantly froze for a moment. In the silent darkness, beams of incomparably demonic red light suddenly shot out one after another. The red light shot out from their left eyes. It was half a meter long and scarlet. Everyone's left eyes lit up one by one. The eyeball and the white of the eye completely disappeared in their eyes. Complex signals flickered in their eyes one after another, corresponding to extremely complex codes. The process lasted about half a minute. The red light began to disappear. But the data in everyone's eyes was still rolling. It was not really an eyeball. It was an instrument implanted in their eye sockets, an instrument that could communicate and give orders. The darkness quieted down again. However, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became incomparably gloomy. The data rolled, and the eyeball of the instrument made a beeping sound. Everyone took a step forward at the same time. This time no one asked anything. The 12 people said in unison at the same time, "Action." It was 10 o'clock in the evening on August 17th in Eastern Europe. The date of death had just passed. The trial day had not yet arrived. In the war that broke out abruptly, in the wind and rain that covered everything, the devil had arrived. Chapter 492. The Caesar Hotel, which had been turned into ruins, became extremely quiet. When the roar temporarily disappeared, there seemed to be only the sound of messy rain and hurried footsteps in the whole city. King Tong stood where she was and stared coldly at the army of Wulan State in front of her. The domain belonging to the invincible realm shrank slowly but extremely sharply in front of her. The domain rolled up the rain in the air. Pieces of rain kept exploding above her and turned into sword intent. The sword intent fell on the ground and turned into broken ice. Reki City, which was already cold, became colder and colder, like deep winter. The elites of the Shadow Throne began to gather quickly toward King Tong. The smell of blood in the ruins had been washed away by the rain, and more elites gathered behind King Tong. A kind of almost crazy killing intent and rage kept spreading behind King Tong. This was the anger of the entire Shadow Throne. Endless anger was surging, as if it was going to burn the entire Reki City. The army surrounded, the missiles bombed, and the fighter jets swept. Wulan State was extremely determined to do everything to the Shadow Throne. From the beginning to the end, everything the military did was to kill them all. There was no probing. From the beginning, the military used the most terrifying means. The most direct way of action had the greatest effect. Under the cover of the fiercest artillery fire, the elites of the Shadow Throne in the Caesar Hotel suffered extremely heavy losses in an instant. But this also completely infuriated the entire Shadow Throne. More and more elites gathered behind King Tong, and the strong killing intent seemed to freeze the whole night sky. The army in the front row of Wulan State was slightly restless. King Tong, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Let Reeker come out to see me." Her voice was neither soft nor sharp, and the volume was neither high nor low, but the magnetic voice spread throughout the whole place in an instant. The army of Wulan State was silent. King Tong narrowed her eyes, raised the corners of her mouth slightly, and looked disdainful. Her appearance and figure were both extremely enchanting. Normally she would not deliberately display such charm. However, at this moment she stood there with a haughty look on her face. Her entire person exuded an enchanting charm that could steal one's soul. "I know that your Prime Minister doesn't dare to come out. From the day the Snowdance Corps entered Reki City, I knew that your Prime Minister was a good-for-nothing." King Tong stared at the army in front of her and said in a cold and arrogant tone, "I want to see your commander." The only response he got was silence. King Tong, whose eyes were full of coldness and fury, showed great patience and waited for the other party's response without saying a word. It was hard to tell whether it was a short or long silence. She quietly shifted her gaze and looked around. Many people in the dark world could see the truth of the great change in Reki City. But the truth was never important in the dark world. King Tong did not expect to persuade the tens of thousands of troops of Wulan State in front of her. What she was doing now was very simple. He was stalling for time. Wang Tianzong had been to the office of the president for a long time. At this time, even if he could not take down Li Tianlan, the roar of countless cannons could always make him realize what was going on here. Calculating the time, if he had rushed back as soon as the sound of gunfire sounded, he should have arrived by now. In Reki City, Wang Tianzong was the only ally King Tong could count on. The Shadow Throne had a secret base outside Reki City, and there were also a large number of elites in it. But the distance between the two sides was too far. It would take at least 2 hours for them to get here after receiving the news. So all her hopes were on Wang Tianzong. It was not because Wang Tianzong was here and it would be easy for her to break out of the encirclement, but because Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan seemed to have the same position. Everything tonight was done by the military of Wulan State. but they must have followed the will of the Snowdance Corps. Moreover, the other party's action was so resolute, which meant that Li Tianlan was very likely to have woken up. For tonight he had even been planning for a long time. All King Tong saw now was the army of Wulan State. But if all this was done by Li Tianlan, she could not be sure what would be waiting for her later. King Tong did not know Li Tianlan very well, but she roughly knew his style of doing things. This young man who had just stepped onto the top stage of the dark world might have many shortcomings such as lack of experience. His mind might not be meticulous enough, but his means were crazy enough. King Tong thought that if she broke out of the encirclement now, the consequences would be unpredictable. But if Wang Qianzong could be here, everything would be different. Because Zhongzhou State would not watch Li Tianlan attack Wang Qianzong. Just like how Zhongzhou State would not watch Wang Qianzong attack Li Tianlan. If Wang Qianzong was here, everything tonight would probably be a negotiation. Perhaps King Tong would have to make compensation for what happened tonight, which was undoubtedly a very aggrieved thing. But compared with the upcoming bloody battle, preserving strength was undoubtedly the most important thing. King Tong waited silently. She liked Wang Qianzong like crazy and she had liked him for many years. That was the man she admired the most, trusted the most, and relied on the most invisibly. She believed that Wang Qianzong would rush over. It was nothing more than a step earlier or a step later. So now she stood here, deterred these ordinary troops with the power that she had burst out in an instant, and then tried her best to delay the time and wait for Wang Qianzong to come to the rescue. Time passed slowly. Minutes and seconds. The army of Wulan State became more and more restless. But Wang Qianzong never showed up. King Tong's firm eyes began to waver, and she became absent-minded. She put her expectations on another person, but she did not get the expected result. There were only two possibilities. First, the other party could not do it. Second, the other party was unwilling to do it. King Tong did not know what had happened in the office of the president, but the reality was right in front of her. Wang Qianzong did not come. The person you are waiting for has reached a new agreement with Wulan State. A voice suddenly sounded, calm, slow and dignified. He won't come. Your Highness King Tong, your delay is meaningless. It will only make me gather more and more troops. I can give you a choice. You and all the people behind you, immediately put your hands on your heads and squat down. I will send you to where you should go. This time, it was no longer the army of Wulan State that was restless. It was the elites of the Shadow Throne behind King Tong. No one believed what the other party said, but it was hard not to believe it. The Shadow Throne had a good relationship with the Wang family of Beihai. But this kind of friendship was not strong enough for Wang Qianzong to join hands with the Shadow Throne in any case. It was King Tong and Rothschild who had a good relationship with the Wang family of Beihai. Not the Shadow Throne. If Wang Qianzong really reached an agreement with Wulan State, it meant that he had given up the Shadow Throne. Regardless of what Wang Qianzong would get from such a move, at least the Shadow Throne would definitely suffer more fatal losses tonight. However, if Wang Qianzong gave up the Shadow Throne, would he also give up King Tong? Several high-level members of the Shadow Throne behind King Tong couldn't help but look at each other. They were born in different wealthy families in Europe, so they were very sensitive to everything. Do you think I will believe it? King Tong sneered and glanced around. The voice came through the loudspeaker and spread over half of the block. King Tong could not determine the location of the other party, but she could be sure that this person was the commander of the operation in Wulan State. You have reasons not to believe it, but this is the truth. His Majesty is now a guest in the office of the President. His Majesty is wise and righteous. Naturally, he will not associate with terrorist organizations. However, His Majesty values friendship. His only request for us is to keep you alive. Your Highness King Tong, please believe in our sincerity. Wang Qianzong had a friendship with the Shadow Throne. But if King Tong was not included, his friendship with the Shadow Throne was really not deep. He abandoned the Shadow Throne and protected King Tong. Wang Qianzong could do it. King Tong's heart suddenly sank. At this moment, she clearly felt that several high-level members behind her were looking at her with naked suspicion. The most important thing was that not only others were suspecting her. Even King Tong's heart began to waver. She did not believe that Wang Qianzong would reach an agreement with Wulan State. However, all the information in the office of the president was not clear. Wang Qianzong had not come so far. King Tong felt that the most likely reason was that Wang Qianzong had encountered a problem and could not get away for the time being. In the case that she could not get away to help, given Wang Qianzong's character, he would not care about the life and death of the other people in the Shadow Throne at all. Was what the other party said true? King Tong's heart was in a mess. Let me introduce myself. The clear and stable voice continued to ring out in the army. I'm Prance, the Minister of the Wulan State Defense Intelligence Department. Your Highness King Tong, His Majesty Sword Emperor, is one of the people I respect most. As long as you can surrender tonight, I can guarantee in the name of Wulan State that Wulan State will not hurt you. Prance, the Minister of the Military Intelligence Department of Wulan State. In the entire Wulan State, he was one of the most worthy high-level officials, but he was also recognized as one of the most low-key high-level officials. He had great influence, but he never participated in any struggle for power and profit. When Wulan State was calm, it was the game between Rekvia and the office of the president. Prance remained neutral and did not show any emotion. After the great change in Wulan State, Prance was also neutral and calm. He might not be the most important high-level official in Wulan State, but he could definitely be said to be the master of the entire intelligence system of Wulan State. You don't have to sow discord between me and the Shadow Throne here. General Prance, the Shadow Throne belongs to me and the Shadow Throne belongs to me. Behind me are all my subordinates. What's the point of your actions? King Tong suddenly sneered. Her attitude was extremely tough, but the suspicious eyes behind her did not weaken at all. Some seeds, once planted, would not disappear even if they did not germinate. You belong to Rothschild. Prance whispered. I suddenly remembered a story. 10 years ago, a secret laboratory of the Rothschild family in France was uprooted, because it was said that there was still nearly 1/3 of the immortality potion in that laboratory. Rothschild has been trying to replicate the miracle of the immortality potion. After the destruction of that laboratory, Rothschild's research in this field has been at a standstill. Because of the destruction of that laboratory, although the enemy did not find the immortality potion in it, they also lost 2 important people who studied related topics. After that, the Patriarch of Rothschild was furious. You also mobilized the entire Shadow Throne to track down the clues. After 3 months of investigation, all the signs finally pointed to the Letzen family in France. The Letzen family was destroyed and this matter was finally over. But I don't know if you've noticed it, but less than half a year after the Letzen family was destroyed, the Patriarch of the Tanlis family also died of organ failure. Don't you realize something when I say this? There was a faint smile in Prance's voice. Bullshit. Before King Tong could say anything, a middle-aged man behind King Tong suddenly stood up and flew into a rage. His face was flushed and his expression was extremely excited, but there was a trace of panic and fear in the depths of his eyes that couldn't be concealed. His name was Erwin Tanlis. He was now the second in command of the Tanlis family and one of the high-level members of the Shadow Throne. The old patriarch who died of organ failure in Prance's story was his father. Back then, Rothschild's laboratory was uprooted, and Rothschild eventually destroyed the Letzen family. The Letzen family was not worth mentioning, and it was just a third-rate family in Europe. However, the Tanlis family was a real behemoth and one of the core components of the Shadow Throne. Now that Prance had dug up what happened 10 years ago and pointed the clues to the Tanlis family, if all this was fake, Prance would be really guilty of his evil intentions. The corner of King Tong's eyes suddenly twitched. She glanced at Erwin and then quickly looked away. She caught the panic and fear in Erwin's eyes. Similarly, after the end of that incident 10 years ago, she also noticed the death of the old patriarch of the Tanlis family. The death of the old patriarch of the Tanlis family was due to organ failure. What this kind of symptom needed the most was the vitality of the immortality potion. Rothschild had been tracking down some clues. But King Tong didn't say it out loud. Because she was the queen of the Shadow Throne. Your Highness, believe me. That incident had nothing to do with the Tanlis family. Erwin suddenly turned around and looked at King Tong with a frightened face. What's there to say about what happened so many years ago? Erwin, of course I believe you. I saw the innocence of the Tanlis family with my own eyes. You don't have to pay attention to his nonsense. He can even tell what happened 10 years ago. I even suspect that he will fabricate what happened 20 years ago. King Tong took a deep breath and sneered. 20 years ago? Prance laughed. His voice was extremely loud through the loudspeaker. I don't know what happened 20 years ago, but I know what happened 2 years ago. 2 years ago, on June 13th in the summer, Your Highness King Tong, do you remember what you did? King Tong was stunned. She really didn't remember. But in the group behind her, an extremely enchanting and charming woman's face turned pale in an instant. 2 years ago, in the summer, you sent one of your most trusted confidants, who was also the most beautiful woman in the Shadow Throne, Poppy, to seduce the heir of the Tanlis family and poisoned him to death in bed. Tut-tut, it was said that he was the only male in this generation of the Tanlis family. After his death, the inheritance of the Tanlis family fell on Miss Limeya. It was said that this beautiful daughter of the Tanlis family had already planned to marry the heir of Rothschild. Congratulations, Buzz. King Tong's brain went blank in an instant. Her body tensed up without batting an eyelid, and all the hairs on her body stood on end. Not far behind her, Poppy's face was extremely pale, but she tried her best to keep calm. Your Highness King Tong, you don't have good taste. You may not know that Poppy, whom you trust very much, is the secret lover of the patriarch of the Johnson family. Even when she entered the Shadow Throne, the Johnson family secretly operated her behind the scenes. There was an indescribable cruelty in Prance's voice. I didn't. With a desperate face, Poppy's face was gray. She walked out, shook her head hard and looked around at the army around her. Finally, her eyes fell on King Tong. Your Highness. Poppy's voice was a little trembling. I have nothing to do with the Johnson family. Everyone saw Poppy, whose face was livid and who looked extremely flustered. Now she seemed to have been completely defeated, and her inner emotions were completely exposed. The elites of the Shadow Throne were thoughtful. They thought, did you really seduce young Master Tanlis and finally poison him to death? Otherwise, why are you so flustered? King Tong was also looking at Poppy. Her eyes were extremely cold and she thought, are you really Johnson's pawn? Otherwise, why are you so flustered? The most important thing was that she had asked Poppy to poison the young master of the Tanlis family. This matter was flawless from beginning to end and only she and Poppy knew it. King Tong was sure that she hadn't told anyone. Then how did the news leak out? Your Highness. Another high-level member of the Shadow Throne came over. His voice was heavy and tough. The other party is obviously talking nonsense and provoking the internal relationship of the Shadow Throne. I suggest that we attack immediately and break out of the encirclement. King Tong looked at the pale-faced Poppy and then at Erwin, who was staring straight at her. Her eyes finally fell on the high-level member who had just appeared. May I ask who you are? Prance seemed to be able to see everything here, and he asked unhurriedly. The middle-aged man sneered and said proudly, I'm Johnson. Johnson Jodl. The patriarch of the Jodl family. There were also patriarchs of wealthy families in the high-level members of the Shadow Throne. Johnson Jodl was one of them. Patriarch Jodl? Prance was silent for a while and suddenly laughed. No, you're not. I remember another name for you. I should call you High Priest Hall. I can be sure that you are the most talented High Priest in the Holy Punishment Priest group, because I accidentally saw your correspondence with the Pope before. You said that you wanted the light of God to dispel the shadow of Europe and let the light shine on the whole world. Great, you should be a poet. The faces of everyone in the Shadow Throne, including King Tong, changed dramatically. Chapter 493. The Vatican's position in the world was very precise. It was the most influential and successful religion in the world. But the position of the Vatican in the dark world was a little vague. A force, an organization, a country. The vague position made the Vatican in the dark world extremely mysterious. But no one could deny that if the Vatican was defined as a force, it was definitely one of the most terrifying forces in the dark world. Every superpower was extremely powerful. It had confirmed invincible realm experts, solid foundations, mature operating mechanisms, and even murderous weapons. These were all important factors to judge whether a force was a superpower or not. But there were also strong and weak forces among the superpowers. Maybe the gap was not very big, but no matter how small the gap was, it was real. If the superpowers in the dark world were compared in detail, the Vatican might be the only behemoth that could keep pace with the Wang family of Beihai. It was the most powerful force in the dark world. The one slightly inferior to the Vatican and the Wang family of Beihai should be the reclusive Lin clan. But the Lin clan had always been reclusive, so it could be ignored. After the Lin clan, it was the Shadow Throne of Rothschild, the Jiang family of South America, and the Polar Ground Alliance before it collapsed. After that, it was the Dark Knights, Fantasy World, and the Heroes Club. The last one was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which had risen rapidly in the past 3 years and was powerful, but its foundation was unstable, and its operating mechanism was not mature enough. Below the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were the first-line forces in the dark world. Among them, the craziest and most brilliant one in recent years was the Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace was extremely powerful. The 12 super masters were loyal, and the murderous weapon Blue Sky underworld fell into the Samsara. The Samsara palace had become more and more perfect. But their most fatal flaw was the lack of a foundation for their development. So now the Samsara palace was like a castle in the air that looked extremely gorgeous but could collapse at any time. It could not be counted as a superpower. Similar to the Samsara palace, there were many first-line forces in the Dark World that were extremely powerful but also had flaws. For example, the 4 families in Eastern Europe could be counted as a member of this list. Sai City in Zhongzhou State was also a first-line force. There were more second-line forces below the first-line forces. Zhongzhou State, Jade Pool, Mount Shu, Azura Path. East Island, Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, Liuhua Palace. Assassin groups and mercenary groups that could ignore national boundaries. Even the European Shadow Throne and the former Polar Ground Alliance were superpowers formed by many first-rate and second-rate forces. In addition to these major forces with transcendent positions in their respective fields, the power center of the special warfare system of each country was another system. Kunlun City, the Men in Black. Every country had its own special warfare center. This was the current situation of the Dark World. In the Dark World, there were 3 forces that could be called superpowers and could also be regarded as special warfare centers. The Shadow Throne was the special warfare center of the EU for complicated and special reasons. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was the special warfare center of East Island. This was also the result of East Island's compromise in the face of strong pressure. The last one was the Vatican. What do you think the Vatican is? The Vatican could be anything. If you said that the Vatican was a super force, then it was a super force. If you say the Vatican is a religion, then it is a religion. If you say that the Vatican is a country, then it is a country. You said that the Vatican is the special warfare center, they themselves were the country, and they were also the center of the special warfare. It was the only force in the Dark World with a history of more than 2,000 years. A long history meant the most stable and mature mechanism, magnificent and unparalleled. In the history of nearly 500 years, there were only 2 forces that had always stood at the top of the Dark World. One was the Wang family of Beihai, and the other was the Vatican. Even though Rothschild had 2 popes. But the Vatican was still the Vatican. This was the most terrible thing about it. It was unshakable and irreplaceable. Rothschild did not replace the Vatican. But their family had a pope, so they could be said to know the forces of the Vatican best. The Vatican had always been extremely mysterious. Even other superpowers had limited knowledge. Some duties were put on the surface. The bishops were the spokesmen of the Vatican, aboveboard and positive. The Holy Disarmament Corps was the strongest armed force of the Vatican, responsible for eliminating heresy. The Holy Punishment Priest Group was responsible for brainwashing. The duties were clear but also vague. But Rothschild clearly knew the specific duties of the major agencies of the Vatican. The duty of the Holy Punishment Priest Group was not so much brainwashing as control. Control and judgment. The most comprehensive control could be done in many ways, and all of them were the duties of the Holy Punishment Priest Group. The most important thing was that although Rothschild had left the position of Pope for hundreds of years, they also had pawns that could play an important role in the major departments of the Vatican. Prance said that Patriarch Johnson Jodl of the Jodl family was Priest Hall of the Holy Punishment Priest Group. The Jodl family was one of the traditional wealthy families of the empire where the sun never set and had a very close relationship with the royal family of the empire where the sun never set. In the whole of Europe, the Jodl family could not be regarded as a first-rate force, but it was much stronger than the second-rate forces. It could be said to be one of the core components of the Shadow Throne. Johnson Jodl was the patriarch of the Jodl family. If his true identity was Priest Hall of the Vatican, King Tong felt that she should not believe Prance's nonsense. How could a person in charge of the military intelligence, who might not even be a third-rate country in Europe, casually reveal the most important secret of the Vatican? But King Tong had really heard of the name Priest Hall. He was one of the 9 red-robed priests of the Holy Punishment Priest Group and one of the most important assistants of the Holy Virgin in controlling the Holy Punishment Priest Group. His code name was Illusion and he was good at disguise, lurking, and hypnosis. In the entire Vatican he was a very important red-robed priest, and his status was even no less than that of the well-known red-robed archbishops in the Vatican. King Tong glanced at Johnson Jodl with a vague look in her eyes. Johnson Jodl's expression was neither flustered nor incredulous. When he heard General Prance's words, he only showed anger. Enough. General Prance, you must be responsible for everything you said. In the future, the entire Wulan state will pay the price for your stupid behavior today. His eyes were tough and blazing. A very heavy price. Prance laughed and said something inexplicable. High Priest Hall, someone told me that many years ago we had a drink by the Lungsan Lake. Johnson sneered and said nothing. He only felt that it was a little ridiculous. He had never been to the famous Lungsan Lake in Eastern Europe. But now it seems that I don't have a chance. I will miss that pot of wine. Prance said softly, Your Highness King Tong, you can doubt my words, but you have a chance to prove it. The real Patriarch Johnson was secretly assassinated by the Vatican half a year ago and replaced by High Priest Hall. He shouldn't have time to do the most thorough plastic surgery. If you can lift the mask on his face, I believe you can get enough surprises. Johnson quickly closed his eyes, concealing all his emotions for a moment. Then he turned around, looked at King Tong and asked seriously, Your Highness, do you believe me? King Tong was silent for a moment. Johnson was just an expert a half step to the invincible realm. It was not difficult for King Tong to verify his identity. But now, King Tong looked at Johnson. There was calmness in Johnson's eyes. Irvine, another high-level member of the Shadow Throne, was quietly looking at the pale-faced Poppy. Poppy was looking at King Tong with undisguised pleading in his eyes. There were countless uneven breathing sounds behind her. At this moment, King Tong suddenly realized that the moment Prance opened his mouth, the whole situation was no longer under her control. After Wulan State attacked the Shadow Throne, the killing intent gathered by the Shadow Throne quietly dropped to the lowest point. At this time, everyone was looking at their companions with fear, and suspicion. Everyone had a ghost in their heart. When this ghost was ready to make a move, everyone looked like a ghost in the eyes of others. King Tong suddenly felt a little powerless. In her sight, Johnson's face was sincere and fake. But at this moment, King Tong really didn't have the courage to do anything. Remove the mask? Or without the mask? The second result was undoubtedly the best. But if the first result really happened, the Shadow Throne was doomed to be wiped out tonight. Most importantly, she had really heard of the name of Priest Hall. Prance provoked the Shadow Throne. King Tong gritted her teeth and said word by word, Kill him. She really didn't dare to take off the mask on Johnson's face. She just wanted to end everything tonight. But what she didn't know was that with her character, she didn't expose Prance's lie on the spot, which was an extremely abnormal thing in the eyes of others. Therefore, the morale of the elites of the Shadow Throne didn't gather. Instead, it declined again. A close-up of King Tong's facial expression was playing on the huge screen. On countless small screens, there were close-ups of the expressions of every middle and high-level member of the Shadow Throne. Each of their subtle expressions was clearly displayed on the screen. In the last military truck of Wulan State's army, Prance watched all this silently through the screen. From the faces of these people, he saw panic, fear, confusion, suspicion, and fear. At the same time, he saw hatred and viciousness. Prance chuckled. He liked this kind of emotion. This was exactly what he wanted most tonight. Their hearts are in a mess. Prance said slowly, General Jack, you can let your army attack. Prance was not the commander of tonight's operation. General Jack, the trusted general of Prime Minister Rieker, was the commander. However, with the arrival of Prance naturally got the command here. Well. General Jack casually agreed a few times, but his eyes didn't move away from Prance. His eyes were filled with disbelief, as if it wasn't until tonight that he truly saw the true face of Prance, the Military Intelligence Department's minister. Minister? Jack hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but ask tentatively, How did you do it? What? Prance was slightly stunned. His appearance was extremely ordinary, but he looked gentle, elegant, and extremely modest. Jack pointed to the extremely complicated faces of the Shadow Throne on the screen. Prance smiled and said softly, It's very simple. Let them doubt and fear each other. Naturally, we can weaken their combat effectiveness and reduce our losses. For example, Poppy is one of King Tong's most trusted subordinates. But trust is sometimes cheap. I know something that only the two of them know, and I casually told them. So there was a rift between them. The corner of Jack's mouth twitched and he had nothing to say. The reason was very simple. But the problem was, how could Prance know the secret that only King Tong and Poppy knew? Don't forget my job. I'm in the intelligence business. Prance said with a smile. Minister, has your intelligence gone deep into the deepest secrets of the Vatican? Jack thought of High Priest Hall and asked, crying and laughing. It's a coincidence. Prance calmed down for a while and then said blandly, My master saw the heretic list of the Vatican some time ago. It was made half a year ago. The Giotto family is one of the families in Europe that are most opposed to the Vatican. But the name of Patriarch Johnson is not on the heretic list. Doesn't that explain something? Jack was stunned. He didn't expect that someone outside the Vatican could look through the heretic list kept by the Pope. Nor did he expect that France would have a master. Minister, Jack was a little hesitant. General Jack, now we can get to know each other again. Prance reached out his hand with a smile and said softly, I'm Prance, the Minister of the Military Intelligence Department of Wulan State. I belong to the Samsara Palace, and I'm also the Chief Intelligence Officer of the Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe. Jack swallowed hard and finally understood everything. All the information just now naturally came from the Samsara Palace. He remembered Prance's explanation just now. He looked through the heretic list of the Vatican. This reason could explain a lot of problems. But the reason was not sufficient. But these were not important to him at all. Jack looked at Prance and said tentatively, attack? The news that the family of Carlos, the former president of Wulan State, had died strangely had begun to spread in Wulan State. Everyone understood the cruelty of this. Now that Jack had been forced to participate, he knew very well what all this meant tonight. This was equivalent to another date of death. Victory or defeat. It was about life and death. On the date of death, Li Tianlan won, so President Carlos died. If the Shadow Throne won today, tomorrow not only him but also Riker and even Li Tianlan, everyone would end up as miserable as Carlos. This was the battle in the dark world. Between victory and defeat, blood, lies and sins flowed. Jack looked at the faces of the elites of the Shadow Throne on the screen. His hesitation slowly subsided and he even gained a little more confidence. What do you think? Prance looked at Jack with a smile. His smile was light and breezy. Jack nodded. Without hesitation, he directly picked up the walkie-talkie and roared, Wulan State. Attack. Kill them all. Prance quietly looked at the army of Wulan State that suddenly began to charge. In the overwhelming gunshots he smiled softly. There was a devil in everyone's heart. This was especially true for a force like the Shadow Throne. Tonight Wulan State was bound to win. But it would not be Wulan State that would devour the Shadow Throne in the future. It was the shadow and devil hidden in the hearts of everyone in the Shadow Throne. Chapter 494. Wulan State was not a first-class country in Europe. Even in Eastern Europe, Wulan State was not the most powerful country. However, this country, which was famous for its many beauties, abundant resources and sensitive geographical location, had the strictest and even cruelest military law in the world. This country had the darkest military court in the world. Anyone who violated the battlefield discipline would rather die than go to the military court. Death was not terrible. The most terrible thing was to live a life worse than death. Every soldier in Wulan State knew this sentence. Military orders were irrevocable. In the face of military orders, the army of Wulan State could be defeated, but no one dared to disobey them, even if the military orders were to send them to their deaths. General Jack's irascible roar spread throughout the whole block at once. Manic, vicious, and hysterical. Kill them all. Such a military order was extremely simple, but it was also extremely firm. There would be no more negotiations, no more confrontations. King Tong also had no capital to stall for time. The lingering sound of General Jack's roar set off a war that swept through the entire Reki city, which was even more terrible than the date of death. The soldiers of Wulan State surged like a tide. After a short silence, a large number of gunshots broke out completely. The army began to move forward. Densely packed soldiers occupied all the space in the field of vision, completely crowded in all directions, and rushed over without leaving a single gap. The smoke and dust rising from the ruins of the Caesar Hotel had been washed away by the rain. Looking down from the sky, the army of Wulan State, which occupied almost the entire block, was rushing in the direction of the Caesar Hotel desperately. King Tong led the Shadow Throne to stand in the center of the ruins. They were surrounded by troops in all directions. The sea of people rushed forward. The open space around King Tong was getting smaller and smaller, and it was about to be completely submerged by the troops rushing over from all directions. King Tong's eyes were cold, but deep in her eyes, there was confusion. She finally realized her mistake. Her biggest mistake was that she should not have stalled for time when she was surrounded. In other words, she should not have trusted Wang Tianzong too much. Wang Tianzong had no reason to give up the Shadow Throne. In such a situation, if he could appear, he would not have waited until now. But he did not appear, which was enough to show that he had encountered a problem that he could not get out of for the time being. At that time, she should have taken action and directly chosen the toughest way to break out of the encirclement. But she waited for a while. This short period of time was not long, but it gave France the best opportunity. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, it used to be the largest organization in the Dark World, but it was not the most powerful. Huge and powerful, there was only a difference of one word, but there was a huge difference between the two. The reason why the Polar Ground Alliance was so large was that it had become bloated after accommodating the will of the four great families and more than 20 countries in Eastern Europe. It seemed to be full of talents, but in fact, it was extremely chaotic. Countries wrangled with each other, and the big families fought openly and secretly, which limited the development of the Polar Ground Alliance. The Shadow Throne had also experienced such a period, but today the Shadow Throne was far more mature than the Polar Ground Alliance. But no matter how mature the Shadow Throne was, it couldn't change a fact. This fact was laid bare in front of everyone, making it impossible for them to ignore it. That was, like the Polar Ground Alliance, the Shadow Throne was also a behemoth composed of many forces and countries. They were more mature and streamlined than the Polar Ground Alliance. But in essence they were not much different from the Polar Ground Alliance. The Polar Ground Alliance collapsed and Eastern Europe was in chaos. From the very beginning, the chaos in Eastern Europe was the internal strife of the four great families. In the end, it involved all the countries in Eastern Europe, various fields and even beliefs. In the end, it became the muddy water of today. In addition to the fact that other superpowers in the Dark World were too strong, the biggest reason for all this was that the Polar Ground Alliance was very complicated inside. The interior of the Shadow Throne was also very complicated. The dozens of powerful families inside the Shadow Throne carried the will of the vast majority of countries in the European Union. Different interests, cooperation, disputes, and conflicts happened almost every day. What King Tong, the Queen, did the most was to balance the interests inside the Shadow Throne. She had done a good job over the years, so she was very prestigious in all of Europe. But no matter how well she did, those disputes still existed. When they were in the Shadow Throne they had the same position. But in their respective families, everyone had different positions. Everyone had done a lot of shady things in the open and in the dark. So, everyone had a guilty conscience. King Tong had a guilty conscience. Because she did ask Poppy to poison the young master of the Tanlease family. Others also had a guilty conscience. Thus, France used the simplest but most brilliant method in the short period of time that she was stalling for time. It was a trick to sow discord. The only difference was that not all of what Prance said was fiction. Almost all of what he said was true. These facts quietly provoked the different positions in the Shadow Throne. They were like a blunt knife stained with poison. It was not sharp, but it could kill as soon as it saw blood. In just a few words, the anger and killing intent that had been condensed in the Shadow Throne turned into suspicion and fear. King Tong had never encountered such a situation. In the face of the army rushing over from Wulan State and the overwhelming hail of bullets, she tried her best to open her domain. Submachine guns, assault rifles, sniper rifles and even machine guns. The completely violent bullets completely replaced the rain and hit King Tong's domain like crazy. It was difficult for ordinary firearms to pose a threat to an invincible realm expert. That was because there were not enough of them. When thousands of bullets were crashing into the domain of the invincible realm every minute and second, the huge impact suddenly made King Tong's domain tremble. King Tong's face seemed to turn pale and she looked a little delicate. The domain of the invincible realm enveloped all the elites of the Shadow Throne. But strange emotions were still spreading in the group of the Shadow Throne, and they became more and more subtle. King Tong's heart had sunk to the bottom. She suddenly took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Everyone." Her voice was low and dignified. The hearts of everyone in the Shadow Throne trembled violently. Everything that happened today is my responsibility, and I'm willing to bear all the consequences. If we can survive tonight, I will submit a review report to the European Union. Now everything is happening in front of us. Maybe there are many problems inside the Shadow Throne, but now, I don't think it's the time to consider these problems. Now we are facing life and death, not grievances. As the Queen, I ask you to cooperate with me. When we kill our way out, I will give you an explanation for everything in the Shadow Throne. The dense gunshots became more and more violent. In the sight of the Shadow Throne, the twisted and desperate faces of the troops of Wulan State rushing over from all directions could already be seen. Countless muzzles were spewing flames and thousands of bullets flew over, almost turning into a wall that filled the whole world. The wall formed by the bullets smashed hard into the domain of King Tong. The domain of the invincible realm itself was the void. But at this moment, the domain in the void gradually took shape under the huge impact. With King Tong as the center, the domain of the invincible realm seemed to be like a transparent and glowing light shield. The light shield was trembling violently as if it would break at any time. Everyone break out of the encirclement. King Tong's voice became cold and indifferent in an instant. The overwhelming bullets covered up the heavy rain, the night, and the whole city. The cold metal color of the bullets was everywhere, which was the smell and color of death. King Tong opened her arms and suddenly said, "Defense." In an instant, the domain of the invincible realm around her disappeared for a moment. The endless light suddenly swallowed the approaching army of Wulan State. Everyone in the Shadow Throne attacked with all their might. Thunder, raging fire, and cold ice suddenly bloomed with blood. Tens of thousands of bullets were evaporated, and most of them exploded and dissipated in the air. But a small number of bullets passed through the thunder and raging fire and rushed into the crowd of the army of Wulan State on the opposite side like a rainstorm. The moment the two sides touched each other, a large number of people died. The bloody and tragic scene directly made the war in the whole block completely white-hot. The domain of King Tong sometimes opened and sometimes closed. Every time the domain bloomed and shrank, it would be accompanied by endless thunder and raging fire, devouring a large number of lives of Wulan State. The Shadow Throne, with low morale, barely formed a hole and rushed to kill in the endless crowd almost crazily. Forward. They killed all the way out. King Tong, who had the strongest attack power, had completely given up attacking. She tried her best to maintain her domain and shrouded all the people in the Shadow Throne. As for the attack and killing, it was all handed over to the elites and high-level officials of the Shadow Throne. Dozens of thunder-shocking realm experts, hundreds of fire-flaming realm experts, and hundreds of ice-condensing realm experts broke out at the same time. They were surrounded by crowds. But the entire Shadow Throne was like an incomparably huge meat grinder, moving forward rapidly in the rain of blood. In the truck that served as the temporary headquarters at the rear, General Jack, who saw this scene with his own eyes, could not help but twitch his face, which was full of muscles and kept trembling. He knew that the Shadow Throne was terrifying. But only when he saw it with his own eyes did he know how terrifying the Shadow Throne was. There were enemies in all directions and they were almost crowded. There were less than 1,000 elites of the Shadow Throne left in the crowd, and they almost didn't stop at all. They moved forward, killed, and kept moving forward. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. The corners of King Tong's mouth were also twitching. Their killing speed was already extremely fast. But the sea of people in front of them seemed to be endless, and they couldn't see the end at all. The surrounding soldiers of Wulan State were already full of fear, but they were pushed forward by the crowd behind them. In despair, the soldiers burst out with ferocity. They rushed over with red eyes and then they were crushed. After one group after another, the soldiers in front of King Tong were still full of fear and finally rushed over with red eyes. There was no word to describe the cruelty at this time. The military of Wulan State. The Shadow Throne. Tonight, it could be said that it was a real battle of life and death. Prance still stayed in the truck and looked at the battlefield on the screen with the camera. King Tong, Erwin Johnson, and Poppy. Several sensitive figures flashed in front of him one by one. Prance narrowed his eyes and looked a little nervous. A white light suddenly lit up in King Tong's domain. The light almost brushed past the limit of Prance's sight. Soon it flashed away. It was like a palm with light. The corners of Prance's eyes twitched slightly. In a very short period of time, no one could see what had happened at all. But King Tong's body suddenly froze. She didn't notice the hand in the crowd behind her, but she vaguely noticed the white light. After the white light, she saw Johnson, who had been very close to her. Johnson's face. Johnson's real face. A small part of Johnson's face was torn off by that hand. What appeared in King Tong's sight was an extremely feminine, handsome, but extremely cold face. High Priest Hall. King Tong's heart suddenly became extremely cold. High Priest Hall also seemed to realize something. He looked at King Tong with deep eyes. King Tong's eyes instantly became extremely fierce. Before High Priest Hall's mask was taken off, she could pretend that nothing had happened. But now, half of the other party's face was exposed, which was equivalent to completely blocking the reason for her not to make a move. King Tong didn't even have time to think about who had taken advantage of the chaos to take off half of High Priest Hall's mask. The moment she saw this face, in order to stabilize the inside of the Shadow Throne, she had already directly made a move and punched High Priest Hall without hesitation. Go all out. Almost at the same time, an ear-piercing voice came from inside the Shadow Throne. Queen King Tong killed someone. King Tong killed someone. Chapter 495 is a chapter of 9,000 words big. It wasn't until King Tong's power had surged in front of High Priest Hall that she was not sure what had happened. The white light just now flashed away. It was precise, swift, straightforward, and the result was equally clear. The face belonging to Patriarch Johnson was torn to pieces in an instant. The current patriarch of the Jodl family only had half of a mask covering his face, while the other half of his face was a strange face that no one had ever seen before. This was enough to explain a lot. At the very least, it showed that the patriarch of the Jodl family in front of her was not the real Johnson Jodl. All of King Tong's actions were based on instinct. The contradictions within the Shadow Throne were obscure and intense, and everyone had a guilty conscience. But before everything was really exposed, King Tong could only choose to unite all the forces to break out of the encirclement. At such a sensitive time, even if Patriarch Johnson was really High Priest Hall, as long as he was not exposed, King Tong was willing to endure it. But now, most of Johnson's mask had been torn off. His true face was exposed in front of everyone. As the Queen of the Shadow Throne, King Tong had no choice. Even if she knew that it was stupid, she had to take action. Even if the person who pretended to be Johnson was not High Priest Hall, as long as he was not Johnson, King Tong had to kill him in this case. A huge force suddenly exploded in the narrow space. The small space nearby seemed to be completely frozen by King Tong's punch. Patriarch Johnson, who had half of his face handsome and cold, and the other half rough and calm, crossed his arms in front of his chest. The strong blue light completely wrapped his upper body, which looked extremely dazzling. The punch that condensed the surrounding air smashed hard on the blue arms. The frozen air exploded, and a strong wind was suddenly set off in the rain of bullets. The strong wind was all-pervasive and blew out blood. King Tong directly punched Patriarch Johnson and sent him flying. Blood fell in a mess, and the huge force kept shaking the illusion. The people in the Shadow Throne nearby were all swaying and bleeding. Patriarch Johnson moved and looked at King Tong. His eyes were cold and mocking. King Tong killed someone. King Tong killed someone. A hysterical voice suddenly sounded and spread throughout the Shadow Throne's phalanx. The moment everyone's eyes shifted over, Patriarch Johnson's furious roar suddenly rang out, "King Tong! What do you want?" King Tong was stunned for a moment and looked over with rapt attention. Johnson was standing on the edge of the battlefield, covered in blood. Countless thunderbolts gathered into a wall in front of him, blocking the bullets coming from all directions. Blood flowed down his body. In the dazzling purple light, Johnson's face was extremely clear. That was Johnson's face. It never changed. King Tong was in a trance, and then she suddenly came to her senses. For a moment, everyone in the Shadow Throne looked at her strangely. Hypnosis. King Tong stared at Johnson. At this moment she could finally confirm his identity. Prance wasn't lying. He was indeed a divine punishment priest. The white light had been fake and no one had taken off Johnson's mask. Everything she had seen and felt had been an illusion. The other party's face was still intact. King Tong didn't know why she was so easily hypnotized. But at this moment she suddenly realized that the Shadow Throne had fallen into an unprecedented crisis. This crisis did not come from the surrounding army of Wulan State. Instead, the shadow that had been hidden inside the Shadow Throne suddenly began to break out, devouring everyone's trust and tacit understanding. King Tong's brain was buzzing. A faint voice sounded in her ears and turned into an extremely noisy discussion. Julian is dead. My God, what does the Queen want to do? She believed Prance's words. Do you believe it? Whether you believe it or not, at least I won't make a sneak attack. A mouthful of blood gushed up her throat, and it tasted extremely sweet. Julian was one of the youngest high-level members of the Shadow Throne. He came from the famous William family in France. The William family was an important behemoth in the entire Shadow Throne, and its comprehensive strength was not much worse than that of Rothschild. Julian, who was only 35 years old this year, had entered the high level of the Shadow Throne. This alone showed the strong influence of the William family in Europe. The William family had a good relationship with the Jodl family. When King Tong punched just now, Julian happened to be beside Johnson. Johnson dodged the punch. However, Julian's soul was torn apart by King Tong's violent punch. Your Highness King Tong, we have never offended you in the slightest, nor have we been framed. Your action just now has brought huge losses to the entire William family. Do you think you can kill your subordinates at will because the Queen is from Rothschild? A cold voice sounded in the crowd. A high-level member of the William family who used to be very respectful to King Tong, stood up and said with a cold face, "I need an explanation for this matter." T explanation. Patriarch Johnson suddenly sneered. The Jodl family will no longer work for a woman who doesn't trust Jodl. This is a battlefield, but as one of us she sneaked up on me. Go to hell. I announced that the Jodl family officially withdraws from the Shadow Throne. King Tong? T. It's all T. His voice spread far away in the night. In the last truck, Prance, who was quietly watching the scene in front of him, was slightly stunned. Then he said calmly, "General Jack, order the 9th Infantry Battalion to retreat and support the third point of the battlefield." The 9th Infantry Battalion was a heavy-armored elite infantry reinforced battalion, with a total number of nearly 500 people. Such elite troops were the strongest troops on the battlefield, especially on the urban battlefield. Under normal circumstances they should not act rashly. However, Jack hesitated for a moment, picked up the walkie-talkie and quickly gave the order. The 9th Infantry Battalion began to move the battlefield as soon as it received the order. Johnson suddenly found that the army of Wulan State, which was closest to him, relaxed for a moment with the mobilization of the 9th Infantry Battalion. There seemed to be a chance to break out of the encirclement. Johnson seized the opportunity without hesitation and said loudly, "King Tong doesn't deserve to be the queen of the Shadow Throne at all. The Jodl family will no longer listen to the orders of a woman. Warriors of the Jodl family, I am your patriarch. Now I order you to break out of the encirclement with me to the west." In the war, the Jodl family became the first family to withdraw from the Shadow Throne. Huge waves emerged in the hearts of everyone in the Shadow Throne. In the crowd, at least 100 elites began to gather decisively in the direction of the Jodl family after a little hesitation. The Shadow Throne was a collection of all the major families in Europe. The power of the major families was the power of the Shadow Throne. When a family withdrew from the Shadow Throne, it would naturally take away its own power. The more families left the Shadow Throne, the weaker the power of the Shadow Throne would be. Johnson wanted to take away the elites of the Jodl family, which was not a poaching. But in this situation, such a move could really be said to shake the foundation of the Shadow Throne fundamentally. At this time, King Tong really had no way out. She saw a conspiracy, a complacency, and a mockery in Johnson's eyes. What she had done the moment she was hypnotized just now could not be made up for at all. It was impossible for King Tong to watch Johnson, or rather High Priest Hall, divide the power of the Shadow Throne, so she could only take action. Dozens of elites of the Jodl family gathered around Johnson. Without hesitation, Johnson turned around and broke out of the encirclement. In the army of Wulan State, one after another, urgent and clear military orders were passed down. In the direction of the Jodl family's breakout, the army of Wulan State made way for them after symbolic resistance, directly opening a way for the Jodl family in the chaos. There was a chance of survival ahead. And behind them was a cliff. King Tong chased after them from behind in silence. She did not explain, curse, or ask them to stay. When all these things were meaningless, the only thing she could do was to take action. As condensed tomb. A pure and dazzling halo suddenly lit up beside King Tong. The light spread wildly in all directions. The thunder spread, the raging fire surged, and the ice burst. The wind that could destroy everything was as cold as a knife, whistling toward the team of the Jodl family with killing intent all over the sky. Johnson suddenly turned his head. In his sight, King Tong's figure rose into the air, still looking arrogant and dignified. But Johnson saw loneliness, confusion, panic, and helplessness in this arrogance. Arrogance was a sin. An original sin. Johnson laughed. He stretched out his hand and pointed at King Tong. His voice was cold and he said without hesitation, "Kill her." An extremely bright dark blue lightning condensed and bloomed at his fingertips. With a slight crackling sound, the dark blue lightning flew in an instant. All the elites of the Jodl family took action almost at the same time. Their subconscious reaction was to fight back with all their might. The blazing fire and the extremely dry lightning suddenly combined. The dazzling light surged in the earth-shattering gunshots. King Tong's figure was still in the air. Her powerful domain devoured all the incoming attacks, but her figure could not help but pause. In just a few seconds, the people of the Jodl family had integrated into the army of Wulan State and were getting farther and farther away. King Tong took a deep breath, and her golden pupils suddenly turned into an extremely strange scarlet. She had been the queen of the Shadow Throne for nearly 20 years. For the past 20 years, the Shadow Throne had been very stable under her control. Although it had never become stronger, it had never weakened in the slightest. Before tonight, the Shadow Throne was still one of the strongest superpowers in the Dark World. But with a sudden siege, the Black Dragon army with a few words from Prance, the entire Shadow Throne had begun to show large cracks, and even its foundation was on the verge of collapse. The Jodl family, which had a strong foundation in the empire where the sun never sets, openly left the Shadow Throne at a time when the Shadow Throne was in danger. If King Tong couldn't keep the Jodl family, the future of the entire Shadow Throne would become extremely dangerous. Kill. She had to kill Johnson and let the other people in the Shadow Throne see their fate. Only in this way could she temporarily deter the others and let them unite against the outside world. King Tong took a deep breath. The taste of blood in her throat was slowly spat out by her. Her body straightened for a moment, and then she suddenly rushed into the crowd like an arrow leaving the bow. The domain of the invincible realm condensed around her and began to spin wildly. King Tong's charming and enchanting body crashed into the crowd. It was like a sharp knife cutting through soft tofu. With the charge of King Tong, the entire army of Wulan State suddenly shot out a large amount of blood. An invincible realm expert charged alone in the army. No one or team could stop King Tong's advance. Broken weapons, messy gunshots, flying blood, and broken corpses flew into the sky and fell down one by one. King Tong's speed was getting faster and faster. As the domain spun wildly, King Tong burst out with all her strength. In just a few seconds, she had already forcibly rushed out a passage of nearly 100 meters in the army of Wulan State. The passage was full of broken weapons and corpses. The next second, the army of Wulan State filled the empty space again and trampled all the soldiers into a pile of blood. There was no battlefield in King Tong's eyes. All she could see were the people of the Jodl family. Johnson kept looking back. Looking at King Tong, who was getting closer and closer, he rushed forward crazily. With one military order after another, the army of Wulan State completely made way for the Jodl family, and a large number of troops blocked King Tong. King Tong, who was completely desperate to break out, burned her physical strength, and approached Johnson at a speed visible to the naked eye. Halt! King Tong, who had begun to bleed from the corner of her mouth, suddenly screamed. With a shrill voice, her figure jumped into the sky, and all the domain instantly condensed on her extremely white palm. Johnson subconsciously turned his head, and his pupils suddenly contracted. There was a dark spot in King Tong's palm, which could absorb almost all the light. The darkness fluctuated violently in her hand, with a power that he could not resist at all. King Tong closed her palm. The darkness spread in her hand, and her entire arm became blurred. Go to hell. King Tong's voice suddenly became very calm. She raised her palm. The extreme darkness instantly spread into a shadow. The shadow obscured all the light and vitality, like a black tide, drowning everything. The unique skill, Shadow Kingdom. It was one of King Tong's most powerful unique skills. No one in the Shadow Throne could resist this unique skill. Johnson could not. His real identity, Hall, could not either. But he was the High Priest of the Vatican. An identity that did not belong to the Shadow Throne could naturally attract reinforcements that did not belong to the Shadow Throne. Suddenly, a ball of raging fire ignited in the black tide. The raging fire rose to the sky in an instant with an incredible high temperature. The rain within a radius of nearly 100 meters was completely evaporated. The cold air rapidly heated up, from cold to warm, from warm to hot, from hot to scorching. The fire gradually spread to the entire Shadow Kingdom. It was like a sun suddenly rising in the darkness. King Tong, who had turned around and was about to fight back, suddenly froze and screamed. Boom! The shadow and the raging fire broke out completely. The aftermath of the power involved the nearby army of Wulan State and the elites of Jodl, but most of the power rushed to King Tong. King Tong's body instinctively retreated, and in the blink of an eye she had already retreated dozens of meters away. A blurry figure in black appeared in front of High Priest Hall. He narrowed his eyes, glanced at King Tong, slowly turned around and said calmly, "Follow me." Hall nodded. The elites of the entire Jodl family followed the black figure and crossed the army of Wulan State, getting farther and farther away. King Tong gritted her teeth. After a few seconds of silence, she slowly turned around. She was not sure who had suddenly stopped her from killing Johnson. But she was sure that it was someone from the Vatican. Among the experts of the Vatican who had come to Eastern Europe this time, the person just now could not be Arsis, and chaos had already fallen. The only candidate was Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican. With the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, after being personally crowned by the Pope, although he was still no match for King Tong, it was also impossible for King Tong to destroy the Jodl family under his protection. King Tong took a deep look in the direction in which the Jodl family had left, turned around again, and rushed to the shadow throne behind her. Thank you. With King Tong's departure, the Jodl family's retreat became slower and slower, and they became calmer and calmer. The army of Wulan State seemed to completely ignore them. They kept rushing past them and besieging the shadow throne, completely ignoring them. High Priest Hall, who was completely relieved, looked at the black figure that suddenly appeared and said softly, "Your Highness Mellad, have you been nearby all this time?" "It's not just me." Mellad chuckled. "At this time, many forces have already arrived nearby and are silently observing all this. It's just that no one has taken action for the time being. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have taken action." High Priest Hall was silent for a while, nodded and said again, "Thank you." Mellad shook his head with a smile, looked at High Priest Hall and said softly, "You did a good job." There were many meanings to this "very good." The Jodl family had openly left the Shadow Throne, which was equivalent to stabbing the Shadow Throne hard. And it was also impossible for the elites of the Jodl family that he had brought out to return to the Shadow Throne. They could only choose to enter the Vatican. The Jodl family was not a first-tier force in Europe, but they were also a very important part of the Shadow Throne. If the Jodl family officially joined the Vatican would undoubtedly have another extremely important bargaining chip in the battle between the Vatican and the Shadow Throne. "Let the light of God dispel the shadows and shine on the whole world," Mellad murmured in a low voice. Mellad murmured in a low voice. He looked at High Priest Hall and said sincerely, "Priest, you are really a poet." High Priest Hall did not reply. He just looked back in the direction of the Shadow Throne. His eyes were calm and cruel. After a long time he said slowly, "The Shadow Throne is finished." Mellad nodded. Whether he was a follower or the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, everything tonight was enough to make him sigh with emotion. The chaos in Eastern Europe involved the whole Dark World. After the Jiang family of South America was dismally eliminated, the Shadow Throne was destined to become the second superpower to lose everything. Even losing everything would be the best outcome. Everything tonight had been predestined. The fate of the Shadow Throne was even more miserable than that of the Jiang family of South America. The Jiang family of South America expelled Jiang Qiansong, but they still had a new patriarch with a bright future, Jiang Guochu. What about the Shadow Throne? The alliance of the major forces had begun to loosen. Even if King Tong led people out of the encirclement tonight, so what? The army of Wulan State could not stop them. But the Vatican, the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, the Men in Black, the Dark Knights, and even Li Tianlan would stop them. So the Shadow Throne was finished. They would not have a second ending. They could only be destroyed. The whole army would be destroyed. Mellad suddenly thought of the Samsara Palace. The chaos in Eastern Europe today could be said to be caused by the Samsara Palace. To be precise, it was caused by Qin Weibai. Everyone said that after the chaos in Eastern Europe, the Samsara Palace would inevitably be completely destroyed. But it had developed to the present. The Samsara Palace had not moved yet. The Jiang family of South America, which had suffered heavy losses, could not recover in a short time. The Shadow Throne would also be destroyed and disappear from the stage of the Dark World. Everything seemed very abrupt and sudden, but it was all inevitable. In such a chaotic situation, the Jiang family of South America would not be the first to be eliminated. The Shadow Throne would not be the first to be destroyed either. And as there were fewer and fewer competitors, the crazy interests in Eastern Europe would become more and more attractive, and the fighting would become more and more tragic. What would it be like after the chaos was over? What was even more incredible was that all of this today was driven by Li Tianlan, but all the preconditions were planned by Qin Weibai. Mellad suddenly felt a little awestruck. He thought of His Highness, and his whole body trembled involuntarily. Qin Weibai and His Highness were essentially the same people, weren't they? They had such a huge advantage in some aspects, and part of this advantage was also quietly revealed tonight. Li Tianlan decided on tonight's war plan. He tried his best to destroy the Shadow Throne. Now the Shadow Throne was finished. But what was the key? The massive army of Wulan State was the key. Li Tianlan sending letters to all the superpowers was the key. And the intelligence that Prance had penetrated the Shadow Throne in a few words was the most important. If such a woman didn't die, no one would be able to sleep and eat in peace, right? Mellad shook his head in a self-deprecating manner and said softly, "You can leave now, High Priest. We are looking forward to what the Jodl family will do next." Hall nodded and looked up in the direction of the Shadow Throne again. A dark light suddenly lit up in the east where the crowd was surging. The light turned into a dark shadow and slowly spread, like a mist or a curtain. But the mist-like shadow was constantly spreading in the crowd. Vaguely, even the gunshots in that area seemed to have weakened. Melad's and Hall's pupils contracted at the same time, and they said in unison, "Death and wither." The two of them looked at each other. Hall nodded and said in a complicated tone, "King Tong is about to make a breakthrough." A breakthrough. King Tong's ranking on the divine list was not high. It was only in the middle and lower reaches. She was on par with Situt Songyue, the city governor of Sai City in Zhongzhou State. After her invincible realm stabilized, she knew that she had no hope of reaching the peak of the invincible realm in this life, so she had never considered breaking through. But what she didn't expect was that when the Shadow Throne was about to fall apart, she once again found an opportunity to approach the peak of the invincible realm. She was close to the peak of the invincible realm. This was the standard strength of the top 10 on the divine list. But there was no joy in King Tong's eyes. European martial arts were also broad and profound, and there were also outstanding martial arts in Rothschild. Ice Condensed Tomb and Shadow Kingdom were both well-known unique skills in the Dark World. In King Tong's current state, her most powerful unique skill was the Death and Wither with extremely strange and terrifying lethality. This was not a unique skill that condensed the void with power, and then formed a domain to tear the enemy apart. The Death and Wither itself was a domain. And it was a domain that acted on the human body. It was just like the ubiquitous sword intent in the Dark World. But when the sword intent was extremely strong, even a casual breath might be completely shattered by the sword intent in the air. The Death and Wither of King Tong spread very far, and the shadow spread to every corner like fog. The army of Wulan State kept falling down. King Tong moved forward and so did the black fog. Vaguely, King Tong really saw the next step of her martial arts. It was very clear but also very far away. King Tong's eyes lit up and then dimmed. She had the hope of breaking through, but tonight she was doomed to be hopeless. And in the current situation, even if she succeeded in breaking through, it would be difficult for her to turn the tide. But her Shadow Throne was right in front of her. In any case, she had to give it a try and do her best to take the Shadow Throne out. "Gather." King Tong suddenly opened her mouth, and her sharp voice instantly cut through the night sky. The elites of the Shadow Throne had changed from a large phalanx to a small one. It hadn't been long since King Tong left, but the elites of the Shadow Throne were still falling one after another in the roar of gunfire. King Tong gritted her teeth and suddenly rushed forward. As the black mist surged forward, an incomparably shrill and ear-piercing scream suddenly rang out. Across the vast sea of people, King Tong couldn't see what was happening in the Shadow Throne, but she could clearly hear whose voice it was. "Poppy." King Tong's heart sank and she rushed over frantically. At the same time, the elites of the Shadow Throne who were struggling in the siege were also stunned for a moment. In the battle, the figures were intertwined, and the accident was completely abrupt. When Poppy's scream sounded, everyone turned their heads in astonishment and saw a sharp dagger piercing into Poppy's back. It was pulled down from his back in an extremely cruel manner, almost cutting through Poppy's whole body. Erwin Tanley stood behind Poppy, holding a knife in his hand, and his body was covered with Poppy's blood. Poppy turned his head with difficulty and looked at Erwin, his eyes confused. However, as a high-level member of the Shadow Throne, Erwin, who had taken the initiative to kill another high-level member, looked calm. He looked into Poppy's eyes quietly, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. "Do you know?" he said softly, "the heir of the Tanley's family that you killed with poison, the only heir of our family in this generation, is my son." His voice was very soft, but he repeated it heavily, "He's my son." The dagger was pulled out from Poppy's back and stabbed into his shoulders again, then his legs and then his neck. The knife light flashed countless times in just a few seconds. Under the sharp pain, Poppy's beautiful face was completely distorted, but the scream died down the moment it sounded. Blood splattered all over Erwin's face. Erwin, who had endured for a long time, was close to going crazy. His eyes turned and fell on the representative of the Johnson family. He sneered and said, "Is this bitch a member of your family? Do you want to collect her body?" The representative of the Johnson family's face suddenly changed and he said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Erwin laughed crazily. He suddenly lifted Poppy's broken body and threw it into the sky. The dagger in his hand was suddenly raised high, and the knife light filled the air. Stop. King Tong's domain suddenly exploded in the air, and the violent domain instantly blasted Erwin away. King Tong caught Poppy's body and fell to the ground. What? Do you know what you're doing? King Tong's tone was full of rage. Erwin's body fell to the ground and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He spat out a mouthful of saliva and his eyes were red. He looked at King Tong with presumptuous and resentful eyes and sneered, "You're a bitch like Poppy. Quint. Bullsh*t. How dare you kill my son? I'll make you pay the price. The whole Rothschild will pay the price. I'm here to announce that the Tanlease family will withdraw from the Shadow Throne from now on and declare war on Rothschild. We won't stop until one of us is dead. *CKU. You're courting death." King Tong's face suddenly twisted in rage and she took a step forward. "King Tong, do you know what you're doing?" Another furious voice rang out. The senior member of the Julian family stood in front of Erwin and said in a cold tone, "Are you going to kill all the people in the Shadow Throne?" King Tong suddenly stopped. "You killed the people of the Julian family and the Jodl family. Do you want to destroy the Tanlease family now? Who gave you the right?" The senior member of the Julian family said in a cold tone, "King Tong, most of us are very disappointed in you. I think after tonight, you are no longer worthy of sitting on the throne of the Shadow Throne. If I can return to France, I will unite all the wealthy families in the Shadow Throne and expel you from the Shadow Throne permanently." King Tong was stunned and couldn't say anything for a while. "Do you think you can still go back to your France?" A gentle voice suddenly rang out in the battlefield. It was light, magnetic, and extremely pleasing to the ear. King Tong's body shook violently, and her eyes were filled with surprise. The surrounding space shook violently in a shape visible to the naked eye. The senior member of the Julian family opened his mouth. Just as he was about to speak, the shaking space had directly swallowed him up. The senior member of the Julian family, who had just wanted to expel King Tong from the Shadow Throne, exploded into a cloud of blood mist. A man who looked like a young man or a middle-aged man appeared beside King Tong. The man was tall and straight, handsome, gentle and quiet, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Erwin stared at the man who suddenly appeared. He opened his mouth. In the battlefield that had suddenly become silent, he seemed to use a lot of strength to whisper, "Paul? Paul William Wong Rothschild, the elder brother of the Queen of the Shadow Throne, the current patriarch of the Rothschild family." Paul turned his head and looked at Erwin quietly. Then he looked at the current Shadow Throne. He stood in front of King Tong and suddenly laughed softly. It seems that many people have forgotten that the Shadow Throne was originally established by Rothschild. And who among you is qualified to expel the people of Rothschild? Who is qualified? No one spoke. There was silence. Even Erwin fell silent. In my opinion, there is no need for the current Shadow Throne to exist. Paul said quietly, "King Tong has made mistakes and so do you. But, it doesn't matter. From now on, in the name of the Patriarch of Rothschild, I will disband the Shadow Throne. As for the previous grievances, I will wait for you in England. You can come to me at any time." Erwin's body suddenly shook and he stood up subconsciously. Paul waved his hand casually. Bang. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. Erwin's body directly exploded into countless pieces. Everyone who saw this scene felt their bodies turn cold. The Patriarch of Rothschild was naturally famous in the dark world. But there was no information that showed that the Patriarch of Rothschild was an invincible realm expert. Everyone thought that Rothschild only had King Tong. Their Patriarch didn't know martial arts. He didn't know martial arts. Tonight, Paul disbanded the entire Shadow Throne. But Rothschild appeared in the sight of the dark world in an even more powerful manner. Paul slowly turned around and looked at King Tong. "If the indefinite grace were in your hands, everything would be different tonight." Paul tidied up King Tong's blood-stained hair and said in a gentle and calm tone. King Tong nodded and then shook her head. She naturally knew what Paul meant. The ranking of the 12 murderous weapons in the dark world had always been vague. But there was no dispute that the strongest human emperor was the human emperor. And the ranking of the indefinite grace was second only to that of the human emperor, which was also indisputable. The indefinite grace shocked the dark world with the fastest shooting speed and the strongest single penetrating power. But it didn't mean that it was useless to these ordinary soldiers. In fact, if King Tong had a spear in her hand, even if the indefinite grace was not strong in group damage, Everything tonight was enough for her to easily break out of the encirclement. But she lent the indefinite grace to the Wang family of Beihai. So tonight, the Shadow Throne was torn apart, until Paul appeared, expelled everyone, and officially disbanded the Shadow Throne. Do you regret it? Paul asked with a smile. King Tong shook her head without hesitation. But he didn't come tonight. Paul continued. King Tong hesitated for a moment before asking softly, why? Anyone will make mistakes and so will he. Tonight he made a mistake. He is still in the office of the president and has been imprisoned by Li Tianlan. Naturally he can't come. How is that possible? King Tong raised her head in surprise. But Paul's expression and tone were still calm. Nothing is impossible. King Tong bit her lip and remained silent. Just admit defeat, okay? Paul touched his sister's hair and said in a gentle tone of negotiation. If they admitted defeat, they would have to accept the failure tonight and leave Eastern Europe. All the interests in Eastern Europe had nothing to do with the Shadow Throne. No, they had nothing to do with Rothschild anymore. King Tong was silent for a long time. Paul looked at her and waited for her answer quietly. The domain of the invincible realm kept shaking around him. Any soldier of Wulan state who rushed up was torn to pieces. As long as King Tong nodded, the two invincible realm experts would break out of the encirclement tonight, and they didn't have to worry about anything anymore. Finally, King Tong nodded. Paul reached out and took her palm, saying calmly, "Let's go home." Chapter 496. 8,000-word chapter. There was no doubt that Reki City was the focus of the dark world tonight. The Caesar Hotel was the focus of Reki City. In the information age, all the information was transmitted at the speed of a phone call. If one was a little more cautious, it was just a matter of a satellite-encrypted phone call. On the evening of August 17th, the military of Wulan State tried its best to besiege the Caesar Hotel, where the Shadow Throne was located. This was not a secret at all. As soon as the war broke out, such explosive news had spread throughout the dark world. It had been nearly an hour since the war began. All the forces hidden in Reki City who thought they were qualified to play and who tried to fish in troubled waters gathered near the Caesar Hotel at this time. Most people had witnessed the process of the Shadow Throne's dissolution. It seemed to be just a few words, but God knew how much Wulan State, Li Tianlan, or Samsara Palace had to pay to get the top-secret information inside the Shadow Throne. All the major forces had been quietly observing the fighting and division inside the Shadow Throne. After a short period of time, they finally confirmed a fact. Wang Tianzong was really not in the Caesar Hotel. And everything that happened tonight would not be a joint act between the Snowdance Corps, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Shadow Throne. After confirming this fact, everyone saw a huge opportunity in front of them. The Shadow Throne was disbanded. Rothschild, which occupied several developed countries in Europe, lost all the forces around them to protect them. Paul William Wang Rothschild, the current patriarch of Rothschild, who everyone thought did not know martial arts, also revealed the strength of the invincible realm. There was no doubt that this was Rothschild's last trump card. In Reki City, which the Wang family of Beihai could not take care of, they would break Rothschild tonight. In the basement headquarters of the military rear of Wulan State, Qin Shilai, the Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe, straightened up the moment he saw Paul appear. Prime Minister Rieker, who had been standing beside him, took a few steps back subconsciously. He couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was, but he vaguely felt that Qin Shilai seemed to have changed when Paul appeared. Previously, Qin Shilai had been quietly watching the war in front of the Caesar Hotel. He watched General Prance destroy the inner defense line of the Shadow Throne, the fight inside the Shadow Throne and King Tong's choice, and the large number of troops in Wulan State being wiped out. In the Shadow Kingdom and the ice-sealed tomb, King Tong's figure flashed in his sight again and again with blood. Qin Shilai had been silent, calm and gentle, but there was only indifference in his eyes. However, the appearance of the current patriarch of Rothschild, Paul, made him completely focused in an instant. This change was very obvious and it was getting more and more obvious. He stood there quietly. As time passed, his figure gradually became a sharp sword in Rick's eyes, distant, sharp, deep and solemn. Qin Shilai squinted at Paul on the screen and remained silent for a long time. I didn't expect His Highness to be telling the truth. He suddenly muttered to himself, his tone somewhat complicated. Li Tianlan's plan tonight was simple but extremely huge. His plan made full use of all the advantages he had accumulated in Wulan State. It was extreme and crazy. The first half of the plan was aimed at the Shadow Throne. The moment Prance stimulated the nerves of the Shadow Throne and the Jodl family withdrew from the Shadow Throne, the plan could be said to have been a success. The middle stage of the plan was aimed at Rothschild. It was not aimed at King Tong. It was aimed at the entire Rothschild. It was Li Tianlan who told him about Paul's strength. He had no intention of destroying this unique financial family in Europe, but he never thought about not destroying it. To be precise, he didn't care. What he wanted was to completely destroy the power of Rothschild in the dark world. King Tong was going to die. Paul was going to die too. He had to die. No country or force in the world dared to underestimate Rothschild. It was a murderous weapon second only to the human emperor. It had 2 experts of the invincible realm. It had a deep foundation. It could cover the sky with one hand in countless fields in Europe. Its wealth was so huge that it was almost beyond the imagination of ordinary wealthy families. In countless fields, Rothschild was a giant beast that could easily devour everything. In recent years, it had drifted away from the Lin clan and the Qin clan in Eastern Europe had returned to the Lin clan. Rothschild had also become the most important ally of the Wang family of Beihai. And it was a force that drifted away from Zhongzhou state. For Li Tianlan, Rothschild drifted away from Zhongzhou state, which was tantamount to drifting away from the rules. He was no match for Wang Tianzong, far from it. The Li family was no match for the Wang family of Beihai, far from it. If Li Tianlan wanted to survive in the shadow of Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai, the only thing he could rely on was the rules. The rules were the general trend and position. Li Tianlan was most certain that he and Wang Tianzong both belonged to Zhongzhou state. Under any circumstances, even if he left Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong would not dare to kill him blatantly. He could only rely on some forces that drifted away from Zhongzhou state. Rothschild was the force that posed the greatest threat to Li Tianlan. As long as Rothschild was destroyed, most of his and Wang Tianzong's power could only be limited to the rules. If Li Tianlan wanted to survive, it would be much easier. Moreover, any force needed a broad foundation to develop. Li Tianlan now had many allies. The Lin clan, the Samsara Palace, the Dark Knights, the Qin clan in Eastern Europe, Sai City, the Dongqing clan, the Jade Pool, Mount Shu, and even the Shadow Sect. This was a huge force that was enough to make anyone look sideways. It was also the biggest capital that Li Tianlan could play with Wang Tianzong within the rules of Zhongzhou state. And his many allies also meant that he needed a lot of development opportunities. If Rothschild was destroyed, there would be a big blank space in the sphere of influence of most developed countries in Europe. England, France, the Rising Sun City, Italos. Germany, these were all benefits that Li Tianlan could share with his allies, and even slowly digest by himself. However, with the division of the Shadow Throne, if Rothschild was really destroyed tonight, the Vatican was bound to dominate Europe. As High Priest Hall said, after dispelling the shadow of Europe, the Vatican was bound to spread the glory of God all over the dark world. Therefore, if the medium-term plan succeeded, it would mean that the honeymoon period of the Snowdance Corps and the Vatican's short-term cooperation would be completely torn apart at the beginning. Therefore, the ending plan for the second half would be extremely grand and brilliant. On the screen, Paul and King Tong gave up all the people in the Shadow Throne and moved straight forward. Some experts in the Shadow Throne, who could be regarded as King Tong's trusted subordinates, followed behind the 2 of them. Paul didn't care about them and didn't expel them, but he wouldn't deliberately wait. The whole night sky was constantly torn apart as he walked. In the deep darkness, the messy rain exploded piece by piece. The void was turbulent and vibrating, and the light was devoured. Paul's figure became more and more blurred. As he walked over, blood splashed everywhere. A large area of the void was constantly solidified, and the whole night sky was dyed with extremely dark colors. Qin Shilai's expression became more and more solemn. After all, Li Tianlan's intelligence made a mistake, a big mistake. According to the intelligence, Paul's current strength was in the invincible realm, but he should not be stronger than King Tong. He was probably in the latter half of the divine list. But in his eyes, how could Paul not be stronger than King Tong? He walked calmly in the crowd against the hail of bullets, stained with blood all the way. Such momentum was much stronger than King Tong's. Even if King Tong made another breakthrough, she would not be stronger than the current Paul. Paul was not at the peak of the invincible realm yet. But vaguely, Qin Shilai could feel that in the whole dark world, Paul might be the invincible realm expert who was closest to the peak of the invincible realm. The sword intent whistled around Qin Shilai and turned into a faint storm. The famous sword cutting edge, which was famous in the dark world, trembled slightly behind him. seemed to be excited and joyful. Qin Shilai slowly held the hilt of the sword and pulled out the blade. The blade was extremely bright. But in the battle with Jiang Qinsong that day, cutting edge showed some slight cracks because it couldn't bear the sword intent of Li Tianlan and him. Qin Shilai looked at cutting edge in his hand quietly. Cutting edge was flawed. But his eyes were full of deep affection. "Your Highness." Rieker couldn't help taking a step forward. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Shilai glanced at him and didn't say anything. "Your Highness, my army can't stop Paul and King Tong," Rieker said in a heavy voice. Stopping a team led by an invincible realm expert and stopping an invincible realm expert were two completely different concepts. A team naturally had a stronger combat capability. However, stronger combat power was never used to break out of an encirclement, but to kill. In the crowd, if an invincible realm expert ignored his team, the possibility of success in breaking through the crowd was almost infinite. The most important thing was that they were not only besieging King Tong now, and Paul, an even more powerful Paul. An invincible realm expert who was really infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, only half a line away or even less than half a line, was leading King Tong, an invincible realm expert on the divine list. The two of them broke through the encirclement like two ferocious tigers. The surrounding troops of Wulan State were nonentities. Many ants can kill an elephant. That's because elephants are too clumsy. Even if the tiger couldn't beat it, couldn't it run away? Tonight, Wulan State had formed a blood feud with Rothschild. It was an irreconcilable blood feud. After sacrificing so many troops, Rieker had no choice but to do his best to destroy Paul and King Tong. At this time he really hoped that Qin Shilai could come forward to restrain him. Qin Shilai looked at his watch and waited silently. He was still waiting for a call. It was Li Tianlan's call. Li Tianlan's plan was too crazy. If he took action one step earlier or one step later, it might have an irreversible impact on the final outcome. He had to wait for an accurate signal. The phone rang abruptly, and it sounded a little ear-piercing in the silent headquarters. Rieker's body trembled. In Qin Shilai's hands, a large number of sword shadows filled with sharpness. He picked up the phone, put it to his ear and said hello. "Let's do it." Li Tianlan's voice was low and determined. Qin Shilai was silent. There was a huge mistake in the estimation of Paul's strength in the intelligence. He was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. And the invincible realm expert in the second half of the divine list. On paper there was not much difference between the two realms. This was a small mistake. But in the actual war this was the most fatal mistake. But it was too late for Li Tianlan to adjust his own plan. "This is a lesson," Li Tianlan said softly. "From now on, I will pay attention." Qin Shilai smiled bitterly. He understood what Li Tianlan meant. Li Tianlan was now in a high position of power, but after all he was not an old fox who had been struggling in the dark world. His temper was too extreme and crazy, so he subconsciously did not leave any room for himself. Now all his strength had been used to the extreme. A slight change would affect the whole body. There was no possibility of change. So even if there was a fatal mistake in the estimation of Paul's strength, the plan could not be stopped. Let's do it. He could only do it. Qin Shilai suddenly clenched the sharpness in his hand and said calmly, "I'm going now." For all the dark forces, Paul's sudden appearance in Reki City was a complete accident. And Paul's strength was even more of an accident. In Reki City the military of Wulan State was still desperately moving forward. But Paul, with his golden eyes, seemed to ignore everything. He walked in a straight line. He rushed forward. There was no detour, no dodging. The void, which was distorted to the extreme, vibrated without stopping. A large amount of blood and bones flew all over the sky. The soldiers of Wulan State suffered more and more casualties, but Paul's expression was always calm, and the domain around him was always stable. At this moment, the patriarch of Rothschild, who had endured for many years and kept a low profile, completely shocked the whole dark world. In the church in the west of the city, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, watched this scene quietly through the screen with a solemn and gloomy expression. The heavy rain outside the window kept falling with the thunder, but in Arsis's eyes, there was only Paul on the screen. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, stood beside Arsis in a veil. She was silent for a long time before sighing softly. "Rothschild is really scary. It's because he's scary that we can't let him live." Arsis calmed down and said in a calm voice, "Tonight is an opportunity." Angel did not speak. Arsis paused and continued, "If possible, I will take Paul down myself." Angel glanced at him. Under the white veil, her eyes were clear but she frowned slightly. Arsis took a deep breath. Obviously he was ready to fight with all his might. He was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. The Lin clan was hidden from the world. Before the appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Aris's strength in the dark world could be said to be second only to the Sword Emperor Wang Qianzong. His peak of the invincible realm was extremely stable, without any exaggeration. So he was the top expert in Europe. Now his position as the top expert in Europe was also stable. But Paul was infinitely close to his current level. Maybe it was just half a step, maybe it was just a small half step and Paul would be on par with him. Arsis suddenly had a deep sense of crisis. Rothschild and the Shadow Throne could be said to be the biggest opponents of the Vatican. For many years, the Vatican had been silently encroaching on Rothschild's domain. This movement was very slow, but the Vatican was not in a hurry. After all, it was difficult for Rothschild to support the overall situation alone with King Tong. There was plenty of time for them to slowly lay out the plan. But tonight, Paul, who was infinitely close to Arsis, appeared. Arsis was horrified. With Paul's strength, Rothschild could be said to be full of confidence. Over the years, when the Vatican had been silently plotting against Rothschild, who could be sure that Rothschild had not done something in secret? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He knew how terrifying Rothschild was. He also knew that it was impossible for Rothschild not to do anything. But the problem was that the Vatican didn't see what Rothschild had done. Just because they couldn't see it didn't mean that it didn't exist. The most terrible thing was that they couldn't see it. Looking at Paul on the screen, the light in Aris's eyes kept flickering, and finally turned into the most naked, killing intent and fierce light. "No," Angel suddenly said. Arsis frowned and glanced at Angel. His eyes were a little blank and he thought it was strange. What did she mean by no? "You won't kill Paul." Angel hesitated for a moment and finally said it herself. Arsis was not angry. He just said calmly, "I don't understand what the Holy Virgin means. If Paul dies here, do you know what it means?" Angel looked straight into Aris's eyes. Arsis nodded, and his eyes became calmer and calmer. "It means that we can sweep away all the forces of Rothschild in the shortest time. It means that we will become the unique and supreme force in all of Europe. It means that the strength of the Vatican will expand to be close to the time when the great Pope of Monlier controlled the Vatican." He looked at Angel and whispered, "Don't you want to see such a result, Your Highness the Holy Virgin?" His voice was steady, but there was a touch of undisguised sarcasm in his eyes. Angel was the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Arsis was the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps. To the outside world, the Vatican had always claimed that Arsis was the Saint War Angel of the Vatican. But the status of the Saint War Angel was still slightly lower than that of the Holy Virgin. It was just that this difference in status had been reduced to almost non-existent under the vague attitude of the Pope many times. The Saint War Angel and the Holy Virgin were not on good terms. This was not a secret among the higher-ups of the Vatican. However, although the relationship between the two was bad, it was not to the point of life and death. Otherwise, the Holy Disarmament Corps would not have come to Eastern Europe with the Holy Punishment Priest group. The future is beautiful, but these are all your imagination. I don't deny that everything you said is possible, but that's in the future, Angel said calmly. Angel said calmly. Her voice was crisp and soft. God said that the future is tomorrow. Arsis had a proud look on his face. Angel glanced at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a touch of something else in them. Tomorrow? Are you sure you can live to see tomorrow after killing Paul? Arsis frowned, snorted fiercely and said gloomily, I don't understand what you mean. You seem to have forgotten. Angel said softly, who split the Shadow Alliance tonight and even forced Paul out? Li Tianlan? Arsis raised his eyebrows. What can he do? It is said that he was seriously injured in the battle with Jiang Qiansong. Now that he has woken up, how much combat power can he keep? Even if he is in his heyday, what is he? In your eyes, Li Tianlan himself may be nothing, but don't forget that he now controls the entire Wulan state and the Snowdance Corps, the most elite army in the world. Angel said coldly. Arsis was silent for a while. Only Angel's voice sounded in the hall of the church. Did Li Tianlan create everything today for us to take advantage of? Your Highness Arsis, I don't deny that your vision just now is very beautiful, but Li Tianlan will also think of what you think. This is Reki City, a place where even Wang Qianzong can be imprisoned. We can forget about other things, but here, Li Tianlan is the most powerful force. Li Tianlan destroyed the Shadow Throne. He and his allies around him are undoubtedly interested in the development opportunities of the developed countries in Europe. If you kill Paul and King Tong, the Shadow Throne will be torn apart and Rothschild will disappear. Do you think Li Tianlan will watch us become the largest force in Europe? Or even become his strongest opponent after entering Eastern Europe? Arcis understood what Angel meant, but he was a little uncertain. He sneered and said, "Do you mean that if I kill Paul and King Tong, Li Tianlan will dare to attack me? He will attack the Vatican without hesitation." Angel said with great certainty. Arcis asked if he dared to do it. Angel answered whether he would or would not. For the young madman who dared to imprison Wang Qianzong, Angel really didn't think that there was anything he didn't dare to do. Paul must not be touched. I know that he is very powerful, but it is precisely because he is powerful that we need to keep him alive. You can kill King Tong tonight and leave Paul, who is a strong deterrent, behind. Angel's voice was almost an order. You can seriously injure Paul, but he must be alive. Our cooperation with the Snowdance Corps is now in the honeymoon period. After tonight, we can take over the theocracy of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe with Wulan State as the center. This is an area very suitable for the development of fanatics. The more believers we have, the stronger our power will be. As for Paul, we can let him leave Eastern Europe with serious injuries. King Tong has fallen, the Shadow Throne has split, and Rothschild has suffered heavy losses. When we have digested the interests of Eastern Europe, it will be a good time to break up with the Snowdance Corps. At that time we will destroy Rothschild and naturally we won't have to worry about Li Tianlan. This is the best choice. Kill Paul tonight? I'm sure that as long as you dare to do it, you won't be able to leave Reki City. Arcis glanced at him, expressionless. Arcis can leave Reki City. Angel, you can also leave. The screen playing the war in front of the Caesar Hotel suddenly paused and then the picture jumped. An old man in a white robe and holding a scepter appeared on the screen. His smile was calm and deep. Your Majesty. Arcis and Angel bowed at the same time. The Pope, dressed in a white robe, narrowed his eyes, glanced at Angel and took a step forward. In the sight of Angel and Arcis, the Pope, who was thousands of miles away, seemed to step out of the screen and stand in front of the two of them. Arcis and Angel's bodies drooped lower and lower. Especially Angel, her whole body seemed to be trembling slightly. Arcis gave her a strange look. As the Holy Virgin, whose status in the Vatican was second only to the Pope, Angel should have played a role that could check and balance the Pope in some ways. However, Angel would inadvertently show extreme fear of the Pope on any occasion, and she would listen to the Pope's orders. As a result, the Pope became the real emperor in the entire Vatican. He could cover the sky with one hand, and his words carried enormous weight. As a result, the Vatican style of doing things over the years had become more and more aggressive, and there was even a tendency to move closer to the super dark forces. Angel. The Pope's voice sounded gentle and calm. Your thoughts are reasonable. But do you really have such thoughts for the sake of the Church? Angel's delicate body shook violently. She lowered her head and said in a trembling voice, Your Majesty, I don't understand what you mean. You and I can both see Li Tianlan's plan. Paul's appearance surprised everyone. Now the strength he has shown has exceeded everyone's imagination. Arcis is now in the strongest state after being crowned. He can kill Paul without paying too much of a price. Are you really stopping him for the Vatican? Your Majesty, Rothschild still has infinite grace. Angel's voice was very low, like a whisper. Infinite grace has been lent to the Wang family of Beihai by King Tong. As the Holy Virgin of the Holy Punishment Priest Group, didn't High Priest Hall report to you? The Pope's voice was cold and light. Death Aria is in the charging period, but infinite grace is also not in Rothschild. Paul doesn't have a murderous weapon. If Arcis kills him, his injury won't be too serious. In this state, Arcis still has the ability to take you out of Reki City. At worst, what we give up is nothing more than some saint warriors and holy punishment priests. Even Mellad may take advantage of the chaos to escape after the coronation. We will fall out with Li Tianlan, but cooperation is not eternal. The plan can't keep up with the changes. After Rothschild is destroyed, the whole of Western Europe and even the whole of Europe will be ours in the future. So what if we give up Eastern Europe for the time being? In order not to fall out with Li Tianlan, we limit ourselves to a few small countries in Eastern Europe. Who is putting the cart before the horse? Your Majesty, Angel forced herself to calm down. You can't underestimate Li Tianlan. I admit that he may become the chosen one in the future, but the premise is that he survives. Right now he is not qualified for me to pay attention to him. His Snowdance core is very strong. I am willing to give up all the Saint warriors in Eastern Europe. As long as the three of you can come back, we will win. We can give up the interests of Eastern Europe for the time being. Angel, do you have anything else to say? Angel felt powerless inside. In the end, the Pope made a mistake that perhaps all the big shots would make. The whole dark world knew that Li Tianlan was rising and was the future chosen one. The whole dark world called Li Tianlan His Highness. But no real big shot was willing to give Li Tianlan enough respect. The reason was simple. Li Tianlan was too young. People might pay attention to a 22-year-old highness on the surface, but in their bones, no one would really pay much attention to him. Such an idea was rooted in the hearts of every big shot. Even they themselves did not know that they would have such an attitude towards Li Tianlan. What would happen if they despised Li Tianlan? Jiang Qinyan despised Li Tianlan and died. Black Ghost despised Li Tianlan and died. Jiang Qinsong despised Li Tianlan, and the Jiang family of South America suffered heavy losses. Jiang Qinsong was even expelled from the Jiang family of South America. His whereabouts were unknown, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. King Tong also despised Li Tianlan. If it weren't for Wang Tianzong's protection, King Tong would have died in the date of death 10 days ago. Wang Tianzong also despised Li Tianlan. Now the Sword Emperor was imprisoned in the office of the president. And now, the Pope also despised Li Tianlan. Because he was really too young. Angel didn't know what to say, so she could only repeat again, Li Tianlan is not so simple. Rothschild is not so simple either. The Pope took a deep look at her and said blandly, Angel, what you said makes sense, but you don't understand the horror of Rothschild. Paul's life is a bomb for the whole Vatican. The bomb must be dismantled. You have your reasons and I have my choices. Now you must carry out my orders, cooperate with Arcis and kill Paul. Angel was silent for a long time without saying a word. The Pope suddenly said, You don't want to kill Paul because you don't want to fall out with the Snowdance Corps too soon, right? Angel's body trembled, and she continued to be silent. You don't want to fall out with the Snowdance Corps for the Vatican? Or for yourself? The Pope's voice became more and more erratic. Angel, do you want to see him? Angel bit her lips so hard that her delicate red lips bled from the bite. Selfish. The Pope said calmly. His voice suddenly expanded as if it had spread to the whole world. His loud and majestic voice occupied all of Angel's consciousness. Selfishness is a sin. Angel's body suddenly shook, and she subconsciously knelt in front of the Pope. The Pope looked down at Angel. After a long silence, he suddenly asked, Angel, where am I? He was in front of Angel, but he came out of the screen. The real Pope was still on the screen, thousands of miles away. You're in front of me. Angel replied naturally. So you still can't see through me. The Pope's voice was a little disappointed. He suddenly thought of a woman who even he felt extremely amazing. If it's Qin Weibai, she will see through everything I'm doing now. Angel lowered her head and said nothing. So in fact, she is more suitable to be the Holy Virgin of the Vatican than you. The Pope said, both in spirit and image. Angel continued to be silent. The Pope sighed softly and said slowly, Unfortunately, she is no longer a virgin. Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. This was something that the whole dark world knew. It was also a cruel fact that made countless experts in the dark world feel heartbroken. Angel's face suddenly turned pale. Under the veil, there was no trace of blood on her face. The Pope took a deep look at Angel and did not speak. His temperament was gentle, but a fierce light suddenly flashed in his eyes. It was like the light of a beast, violent, cruel, crazy, and disgusted. This fierce light was so bright and so obscure, like the wind and rain in the outside world at night, or like a precursor. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.